Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep. Welcome back to our discussion on disaster management. In the last class, we had started with tropical cyclones. So let's continue the discussion from here. Yesterday, I had explained the process through which these cyclonic storms are formed. We understood that tropical cyclones, which form in the tropical areas, they're essentially a cyclonic vortex. It is a storm or a cyclone which is in a vortex kind of circulation. It's essentially a circulatory system. These cyclones, when they make landfall, when they strike the continental landmass, they generate very high speed winds. They bring torrential rainfall in those coastal areas, and they also cause a storm surge or coastal flooding. That is what makes these cyclones extremely devastating. They bring a lot of destruction and damage to human life, to property and infrastructure, and as well as to the environment. Yesterday, I also explained some of the basic conditions that are needed, the preconditions which are needed for the formation of a tropical cyclonic system. We discussed that for the formation of this closed circulatory loop, you need a low pressure depression. We need a strong enough Coriolis force along with rapid upward movement of hot, moist air. Now, how do you generate these conditions? As in, how does nature, right? How does it generate these essential conditions? There are 5 specific criteria that are needed for the formation of this closed circulatory loop. First of all, we need a large open sea surface. We need a high surface temperature. If the surface temperature is above 26-27 degrees Celsius, then the rate of evaporation can be high. So as the rate of evaporation will be higher, it constantly produces warm, moist air. Basically, moisture is constantly produced because of the high rate of evaporation that happens in tropical seas, such as the Bay of Bengal, for example. This moist air will start rising upwards, and for the moisture to rise, you need a vertical wind shear. You need a vertical wind speed difference. There should be a small variation in the vertical wind speed, which causes the warm moisture to rise up and then condenses and forms clouds. I already refreshed once. Again?
Yes, again.
Should I repeat?
Yes.
Hello everyone. Sorry for the interruption. I was just informed that there was a slight audio issue. I hope now it is clear. Can you please let me know in the comments if the audio and video is fine? Okay, great. So I had just begun the class. We were just discussing what we studied yesterday. I was just summarizing the discussion we had under tropical cyclones. I was talking about how tropical cyclones are a closed circulatory or a vortex kind of a system that causes massive destruction. They bring very high speed winds, they bring torrential rainfall, and they even cause coastal flooding, which leads to enormous damage in the affected areas. For the formation of this cyclonic system, there are few basic conditions that are needed. You need few favorable conditions to be present, such as a large open sea surface. The surface temperature of the sea water should be high enough to provide for a high rate of evaporation. This constant evaporation will generate the warm moisture, the warm moist air, which starts rising upwards because of the small difference in the vertical wind shear. The difference in the vertical wind speed will push the moisture upwards, and eventually the moisture will condense to form clouds. So a dense system of clouds are formed at the higher reaches, and this essentially becomes a low pressure depression. As the warm, moist air keeps rising upwards, that center becomes a low pressure depression, which attracts winds from the high pressure areas. So winds from high pressure areas will gush towards the depression, and then the Coriolis force generated by the earth induces the cyclonic vortex. It pushes the wind into a circulatory motion where the system starts circulating in an anti-clockwise direction in the northern hemisphere. Whereas in the southern hemisphere, it starts circulating in a clockwise direction. This is because of the direction of Coriolis force in the northern and southern hemisphere. So that is how a cyclonic system, a circulatory vortex system is set up, where you have high-speed winds that are circulating with constant moisture being produced through evaporation, which is rising upwards to form dense clouds. So this system will start building up. This cyclonic system will start building up. And the wind which is rising upwards, the currents, they will diverge at the upper level, and it comes back to form a closed loop. Right? This is what we had studied. Just to refresh your memory, I'll show you these infographics. We saw them yesterday as well. You can see the high rate of evaporation happening here in the first image. This is a large open sea where you have high surface temperature, which is causing faster evaporation that induces warm, moist air into the atmosphere. Due to the difference in the vertical wind speed, the moisture keeps rising up, forming dense clouds at the top. At this low pressure depression, this becomes the low pressure center, which attracts winds from the nearby high pressure areas. So as the wind rushes towards the depression, Coriolis force will induce the vortex. The wind currents are given a circulatory motion because of Coriolis force. So that is how the initial stage of a cyclonic system is formed around a depression, around a low pressure area. So as the system builds over a few days, it keeps accumulating more and more moisture. Moisture is the fuel which is powering a cyclone. As there is constant evaporation happening in tropical seas, especially during certain seasons, the moisture acts as a fuel which is driving the cyclonic system, and more clouds and winds are accumulated around this circulatory system. Now, please look at the next image as well. It is showing you the cross section of a cyclone. Here you can see the eye or the center of the storm. The eye of the storm is always a region of calm. If you are present at the eye of the storm, let's say, there you will not feel the cyclonic activity. You will not experience the high-speed winds and the turbulent conditions that are present. All right, this is the low-pressure depression center. Around it, you will have column of clouds with wind columns that are circulating, and this system keeps building up as it accumulates more moisture, thus forming dense rain-bearing clouds at the top. Is that clear? So the large ocean, the open seas, which provide for constant supply of moisture, that is what drives the cyclonic system. When the sea surface temperature is high enough, there is constant evaporation happening where the warm, moist air keeps rising upwards to form these dense rain-bearing clouds. All right, you can see how the circulatory system is getting set up, and you can also see the upper divergence. This upper divergence essentially forms a circulatory loop, and this system will start moving as well. It does not remain stationary. It starts moving across the sea surface and starts heading towards landmass, towards continental landmass. So as the cyclonic system starts moving, right, it keeps on accumulating more moisture, forming more clouds, accumulating more winds.
And finally, when it strikes the land mass, we call that event as landfall. We say that the cyclone has made landfall. That is when it makes contact with the landmass. So as soon as the landfall event occurs, that is when the supply of moisture is cut off. The supply of moisture gets cut off as the cyclonic system starts moving inwards towards land. Correct? So essentially, the fuel supply is taken out. The fuel which was powering the cyclone is suddenly brought to an abrupt halt. So it's like your vehicle where you're traveling at a high speed and you suddenly apply brakes or you turn off the engine, right? So the inertia, the momentum carries forward. Something similar happens here as well in a cyclone, and the wind currents, they will gush towards the land, and the rain bearing clouds will start precipitating, bringing extremely heavy rainfall in the coastal areas and also in the inland areas. And we'll also witness massive coastal flooding in the coastal area. So this is the immediate impact of the landfall event. So as the supply of moisture is cut off suddenly when the cyclone enters the landmass, the winds will gush towards the land and very, very high speed winds are generated. Wind speeds can touch 150, 180, 250, up to 280, 300 kilometers per hour. So these high speed winds, they can uproot everything in the path. They can destroy houses, they can uproot infrastructure, they will damage the villages that are present, they will uproot trees. So it's a very violent, destructive event. And as a result, there is large scale destruction and damage along the affected areas. You also witness extremely heavy rainfall, right, in the entire path of the cyclone and even in the regions around it. Torrential rains are received for several days, for at least few days, at least 2 to 3 days at least, that could cause secondary, tertiary disasters. This heavy rainfall will lead to landslips. It could cause massive flooding. It could lead to collapse of buildings and structures. So this brings a lot of damage as well. The heavy rainfall causes extreme damage in the affected areas. And along with that, the storm surge brings the sea water inland and floods some of the areas along the coastal region. So the coastal flooding is also extremely dangerous for the coastal villages and the cities and other infrastructure projects that are present right along the coastline. So that is the reason why cyclones are extremely dangerous. They can bring large-scale destruction to the affected region. Now let me tell you, in which regions can we witness the formation of these tropical cyclones? The name tropical cyclone is a generic name, but in different regions, in different parts of the world, it is known by different names. In the northern parts of the Indian Ocean, that is in Bay of Bengal, in Arabian Sea, and even towards East Africa, in this region of the Indian Ocean, they are just referred to as tropical cyclones. The cyclones we witness in Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and the larger part of the Indian Ocean, right? It is just known as tropical cyclones. Whereas these cyclones that form near Japan in the Pacific, which strikes Japan, Korea, and China, here it is referred to as typhoons. The name is different, but the process, the mechanism is exactly the same. In Australia, it is referred to as Willy Willy in the South Pacific. Is that clear? Then you have the Atlantic towards North America and the Caribbean region, where we refer to it as hurricanes. Please look at the map here. You can see the Gulf of Florida over here. This is the state of Florida of the United States. Then you have your Caribbean region over here, where you have countries like Cuba and all the countries that are part of West Indies, like Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, etc. This region of the Atlantic is a hot spot for cyclonic activity. So here, the cyclones are known as hurricanes. Even towards the west coast of the US, towards Mexico and California, even over here, the cyclones are known as hurricanes. Understood? Recently, just a few days back, the US was hit by a major hurricane, right, which originated towards the west coast. These hurricanes are very rare actually. The west coast hurricanes are very rare. Usually it is Florida and Caribbean region which is affected by hurricanes. That is the east coast of the United States. Every year this is where hurricanes form. But on a rare occasion, hurricanes can form towards the west coast, where Mexico and California can also be affected. The recent hurricane, that is Hurricane Hillary, some of you might have read about it in your newspapers. It's a very rare cyclone that formed in the west coast of North America, and it caused a lot of devastation in Mexico as well as in California, in Southern California especially. Right? So it's a recent disaster, a recent example for you. So this is how cyclones have different names in different parts of the world. This could be very important for your prelims as well. Is that clear? So it's known as typhoons in China, Japan, Philippines, and the Korean Peninsula. It's known as hurricanes towards North America and the Caribbean. In the Indian Ocean, it is just referred to as tropical cyclones. So South Asia, West Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Africa, they're all affected by tropical cyclones in the Indian Ocean. Is that clear? So East African countries like Mozambique, Tanzania, and Mauritius and Madagascar, they are hit by these tropical cyclones in the southwestern part of Indian Ocean. If you come towards Bay of Bengal, then Maldives, Sri Lanka, then India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, all these countries in South Asia and Southeast Asia, they are affected by the tropical cyclones. Then towards Arabian Sea, it is India and Pakistan, Iran, and West Asian countries like United Arab Emirates, Oman, Yemen. They are all affected by the cyclones that form in the Arabian Sea. Is that clear? So please be aware of the distribution of tropical cyclones in the world and the names through which they are called. Now, the impact of cyclones, I think, is very clear, right? It will bring large-scale destruction. There will be loss of lives. There will be a lot of injuries if you don't take precautions. There will be large-scale destruction of property and infrastructure. So property such as agricultural fields, houses, especially the kacha houses, which are not strong enough, where tin sheets and other temporary roof structures are used, right? Such houses and such private property will get easily destroyed. Whereas strong concrete buildings, right, which are well constructed, they can withstand the impact. But the kacha houses, small huts, then the smaller houses, right, especially in the fishing villages, which have these thatched roofs, which have tin sheets as roofs, they will easily fly apart and they'll be ripped apart by the high-speed winds. So agricultural fields, houses, they will witness massive damage, and even cattle, fishing boats, and the coastal villages, they will suffer enormous damage. Is that clear? For fishermen, their livelihood can be completely uprooted if their fishing villages and fishing boats are destroyed. For farmers in this region, right, if their farm fields, if their agricultural fields are flooded with salt water, it can cause massive destruction. It will destroy the standing crops, and it could affect the future cropping seasons as well. So there will be large scale destruction of property, disruption to livelihoods that causes a lot of economic suffering in the affected area. There will be a lot of economic damage. All right. The threat to human lives is very, very serious. If timely evacuations are not done, if there is no early warning and forecasting, if alerts are not issued, and if people are not evacuated, there can be a very large death count. Thousands of people could get killed. Then your infrastructure, especially critical infrastructure, this can suffer a lot of damage. Because see, in coastal areas, there will be a lot of critical infrastructure present. Coastal areas are the lifeline of your economy in a globalized world, right? This is where major projects like seaports, airports, road and rail network, then your power cables, mobile internet connectivity, then even power plants, including nuclear plants, and as well as your naval bases, right? All such strategic facilities will be located along your coastline. There could be a lot of industries as well. There could be petrochemical industries, which are processing petrochemical products. There could be metallurgical industries. There will be warehouses storing all the goods and the agricultural produce which are to be exported, right? So there will be very, very important facilities present on the coastline. These cyclones can cause enormous damage if the infrastructure is not resilient. If you haven't built resilient infrastructure which can withstand the impact, then the infrastructure can be completely uprooted. That destroys connectivity, and it can uproot the economy of the region. It can cause a major economic disruption, and potentially it can lead to industrial accidents and disasters, including a possible nuclear accident, right? If the right safety measures are not taken at the nuclear plants that are located along the coastline, potentially there could be a nuclear disaster as well. Then you have to protect your strategic facilities. Now take India, for example. Look at the east coast of India. Along with all these infrastructure projects, we also have other strategic facilities on the coastline, right? We have critical naval bases like Visakhapatnam, Chennai, then Kolkata. All these are major naval bases of the Indian Navy. Our nuclear powered submarines of the Arihant class, they are stationed at Visakhapatnam. We have DRDO's missile testing facility at Balsor, also known as the APJ Abdul Kalam Island. Then ISRO's Space Center, the launch pad of ISRO at Sriharikota, is on the east coast of India, right? We have nuclear plants at Kalpakam and Kundankulam in Tamil Nadu. All these are critical projects, strategic projects. So cyclones can cause destruction and damage to these projects, which could affect your national security as well. So it's very, very important to ensure that your infrastructure on the coastline is disaster proof. It should be disaster resilient. So there will be environmental damage as well. The coral reefs could be destroyed. Mangroves and wetlands could suffer a lot of damage. Is that clear? The marine ecosystem and the coastal ecosystem could be affected, causing environmental damage and biodiversity destruction, right? Several threatened species could lose their lives because of the heavy rains and floods. Then coral structures along the coastal areas could get damaged. Your backwaters, right, which includes deltas, estuaries, lagoons, they could get polluted because of the flooding and the entry of seawater, which could disrupt the ecosystem and even destroy your tree cover and mangrove forest cover. This will disrupt the aquatic life, the animals, the birds, which are found in these key ecosystems. So there will be a lot of environmental damage as well because of these tropical cyclones. So in short, cyclones cause enormous damage, right? It will cause loss of life, loss of property, damage to critical infrastructure and strategic infrastructure, and damage to your environment and biodiversity. Now, if you look at India, India is indeed very, very vulnerable to the impact of tropical cyclones. In fact, India is one of the most affected countries in the world, right? Just like Philippines, Japan, United States, Mozambique. Similarly, with these countries, India also faces the complete impact, the full impact of tropical cyclones in the northern Indian Ocean. So in both the seas present around India, there is cyclonic activity which is witnessed in Bay of Bengal and as well as in Arabian Sea and the northern Indian Ocean. It is a hot spot. It's one of the most important breeding grounds for tropical cyclones. So all the coastal states of India, they are all vulnerable. Is that clear? From West Bengal to Tamil Nadu to Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, then Puducherry, the Union Territory of Puducherry, right? They're all extremely vulnerable. So especially the east coast of India is more vulnerable as compared to the west coast of India. The west coast of India is relatively less vulnerable. I'm not saying west coast is safe. I'm not saying west coast does not witness the impact of cyclones. I'm saying relatively, compared to east coast, west coast is slightly safer. It is slightly less vulnerable compared to the east coast of India. So along the west coast, all the coastal states, Kerala, Karnataka, Goa, Maharashtra, Gujarat, right? They're all vulnerable to the impact of tropical cyclones. So there must be some reason as to why east coast of India is more vulnerable than the west coast. Correct? So that is what we should understand. We should focus on the hazard vulnerability map of India with regard to tropical cyclones, identify the regions which are most affected, and then study why east coast of India is more vulnerable. How come there are more cyclones forming in Bay of Bengal as compared to Arabian Sea? How come the cyclones in Bay of Bengal are more destructive? They are more intense as compared to the cyclones that form in Arabian Sea. So that is a very important concept you have to understand. And we should also discuss the new trend. In the last 15 to 20 years, we are witnessing a new trend where even in Arabian Sea, there are more cyclones taking shape compared to before, right? Let's say you compare data of last 70, 80 years with what's happened in the last 10, 15 years. We are witnessing a definite shift in this pattern. We are seeing more cyclones forming in Arabian Sea and high intense cyclones as well, which is hitting the west coast of India. The latest example, Cyclone Biparjoy. Cyclone Biparjoy caused large-scale damage to Gujarat and the west coast of India just a few months back, right before the monsoons began, right before the monsoon season. Cyclone Biparjoy that formed in Arabian Sea became a high-intensity cyclone, a severe cyclonic storm that hit the west coast and caused a lot of damage in Gujarat. So experts believe that we are witnessing more cyclones in Arabian Sea as well. We are witnessing high-intensity cyclones taking shape in Arabian Sea. Right? That is a new change, a new trend which is coming up. So we should understand why. So please look at the map. It clearly highlights the vulnerability of India. Essentially, the entire coastline is very vulnerable. But to an extent, parts of Maharashtra, Goa, and Karnataka are relatively safe. All right, comparatively, they're slightly safer. Even the southern tip of India is relatively safer. But Gujarat, these areas of Maharashtra, these parts of Karnataka and Kerala, almost the entire coast of Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, then the whole coastline of Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, and West Bengal, they are all in the direct line of fire. Understood? The cyclones that form here in Bay of Bengal, they can curve to hit Bangladesh as well. Recently, Bangladesh was hit by a major cyclone. Myanmar is also in the line of fire. The same cyclone caused a lot of destruction in Myanmar as well. These cyclones can even curve towards other Southeast Asian countries like Thailand, and even Indonesia can feel the impact, right? So the entire region of South Asia, Southeast Asia is vulnerable, including Sri Lanka, Maldives. When you come towards Arabian Sea, Pakistan, Iran, and West Asia, they are all vulnerable. The Arabian Sea cyclones, they can not only curve towards India, they can also move towards Pakistan or Iran or Oman, Yemen, and United Arab Emirates. So all these countries are in the same zone, right? So this is the vulnerability of India and the region, that is the Northern Indian Ocean. Now let us understand why Bay of Bengal is considered to be more vulnerable to the impact of cyclones. What's the reason behind it? Why does Bay of Bengal witness more cyclones? If you just take the number of cyclones forming in a given year, Bay of Bengal witnesses many times more cyclones than Arabian Sea. Then even if you look at the intensity, you should understand why the intensity of cyclones in Bay of Bengal is more severe as compared to cyclones in the Arabian Sea. There are quite a few reasons responsible for this, and we'll look at them one by one. First, please look at this data. The factual data is also very important, especially when you're writing a mains answer. There can be a question on these lines. UPSC might ask you to explain why Bay of Bengal witnesses more cyclonic activity as compared to Arabian Sea, and discuss the new trends which are coming up in the Arabian Sea. Bay of Bengal witnesses 5 times more cyclonic activity as compared to the Arabian Sea. This is what historical data tells us. Since we started tracking cyclones, right, in the last 100 plus years, based on this historical data of more than 1 century, we can safely conclude that Bay of Bengal does witness more cyclonic activity than the Arabian Sea. It is 5 times more. Almost 58% of the cyclones formed in Bay of Bengal, they strike the east coast of India. Is that clear? When I say the coast, it could also refer to Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Southeast Asia as well. But the point is 58% of them, a majority of these cyclones in Bay of Bengal, they make landfall. The geography of the region is such that, and the processes in this region is such that, most of the cyclones, almost 60% of the cyclones forming here, they will move towards the coastal areas and they will make landfall. Is that clear? What happens to the rest of the cyclones? The rest of the cyclones, they will dissipate over a period of time. They will dissipate in the sea itself. Some cyclones are not strong enough. They may not have enough moisture supply, or the surface temperature may not be high, right? Or the depression is not enough, the low pressure center is not enough, or the wind currents are not enough. So over a period of time, some cyclones are low intensity cyclones. They will dissipate and die out in the sea itself. So then it does not exactly become a disaster. All right. Only the ones which build up into a severe cyclonic storm and which strike the coastline and make landfall, those are the ones which cause the disaster. Right? So in Bay of Bengal, almost 60% of them hit the coast. Only the rest are getting dissipated in the sea itself. Whereas in Arabian Sea, just 25% of them make contact with land. They either hit India or Pakistan or West Asia, right? But majority of them are dissipating. They dissipate in the Arabian Sea itself. So in that regard, the west coast is relatively safer compared to the east coast of India. Now, let's examine the different reasons, the geographical factors that are responsible for this phenomena. Right? There should be specific reasons why this is happening, as to why Bay of Bengal is witnessing more cyclonic activity and more intense activity as compared to Arabian Sea. The first major difference is the temperature difference. Please write down this point. There is a considerable temperature difference between Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. The Bay of Bengal is warmer, especially the surface level water is more warm in Bay of Bengal as compared to Arabian Sea. So this directly determines the supply of moisture, the rate of evaporation, and the formation of a low pressure depression. Is that clear? There's a reason why the temperature in Bay of Bengal is higher than Arabian Sea. Does anyone know why? Can you tell me in the comments? Can someone let me know in the comments why Bay of Bengal is warmer than Arabian Sea? What could be the reason? Shanwaz says it's a closed sea. Okay, it's part of the reason. If you can see the shape of Bay of Bengal, right? It's a closed bay. It's surrounded by land on almost all three sides, right? You have South Asia and Southeast Asia covering this water body. So it's a more closed, tight space compared to Arabian Sea, which is relatively more open, right? So that definitely plays a role. But other than that, there is another big reason. Very good. Some of them have got the right answer. The influx of water, the influx of fresh water, and how it changes the salinity levels as well. Now see, please remember that Bay of Bengal receives more rainfall during the monsoons as compared to Arabian Sea. All right? Which means there is more fresh water being introduced directly through rain. Is that clear? Compared to Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal gets more rainfall. But the other reason is that there is a constant flow of fresh water from the east flowing rivers of India. I'm sure you would have studied in geography that most of the rivers in India are east flowing rivers, right? The entire Gangetic system, the Brahmaputra, right? And all the peninsular rivers from Mahanadi to Kaveri, right? Krishna, Godavari, all of them are east flowing rivers. So they bring a large volume of fresh water into the sea. They all drain into Bay of Bengal. Compared to that, the west flowing rivers of India are less and they are smaller. West flowing rivers of India, the number is also small compared to east flowing rivers. And the volume of water they bring is also less. So there is a lesser introduction of fresh water into Arabian Sea. Is that clear? So Bay of Bengal gets more freshwater influx through rainfall and east flowing rivers, whereas Arabian Sea gets lesser freshwater due to slightly lower rainfall and less water coming from the west flowing rivers. Now, how does this play a role? This plays a role because fresh water is more warm as it is flowing through land, right? That too in a tropical area, the water would have already heated up, right? It is relatively more warm. So there is a constant entry of warm water, which does not allow the mixing of the warm water layer with the cool water below. The cold water is always dense, so it sinks to the bottom of the sea, right? As you dive in a sea or an ocean, right, the temperature will drop. At the bottom, you'll have the coldest water. At the top, you'll have the warm water. Ideally, if there is no mixing of fresh water, there will be a mixing of the warm and the cold water, right? This convection mechanism which happens in the water body will slightly reduce the temperature of the sea surface. But if constantly there is fresh warm water coming from rivers, from rainfall, then what happens? The mixing of warm water with the cool water below gets affected. So there is a constant presence of warm water on top. The top warm layer will always remain, leading to more sea surface temperature. If you don't have a high influx of fresh water, fresh warm water, the warm water will eventually mix and the temperature will start coming down because the cold water will moderate the temperature. This affects the salinity levels as well, right? So these factors play a critical role in determining the rate of evaporation. So what does it mean? It means that rate of evaporation in Bay of Bengal is much faster compared to Arabian Sea. Basically, there is more fuel present in Bay of Bengal than Arabian Sea. That is a prime reason why Bay of Bengal witnesses more cyclonic activity. So the closed nature of the sea, the constant influx of fresh water, right? The inability of warm water to mix with cooler water below, and the changes it causes in salinity levels. They all influence the warm water temperature at the surface, which causes a faster evaporation, leading to more depressions being formed. Right? You will have more low pressure centers in Bay of Bengal around which cyclones can take shape as compared to Arabian Sea. Along with that, since Arabian Sea is more open towards the rest of the Indian Ocean, it receives stronger winds, stronger wind currents and trade winds, which dissipates the heat. Is that clear? Arabian Sea witnesses stronger wind currents coming from the other parts of the Indian Ocean. So here the heat dissipates very quickly at the sea surface. Whereas Bay of Bengal, being a closed water body, it has a closed shape and it has relatively weaker winds. So the temperature is not moderated. There is no mixing with cold water below. There is no strong wind currents to weaken or to bring down the temperature. That is the reason why there is a constant supply of warm water in Bay of Bengal, whereas it's relatively less in Arabian Sea. Is that clear? These are very, very important reasons. Next, there are a few other reasons as well. Bay of Bengal is connected with the Pacific Ocean. There is a very small land mass that marks a very small divide between Bay of Bengal and South China Sea and Pacific Ocean. So as a result, cyclonic systems that form in the Pacific and South China Sea, they move across Thailand and Andaman Nicobar Islands and they reach Bay of Bengal. The low pressure depressions which originate in the Pacific, right? In South China Sea, in Gulf of Thailand, in the Philippines Sea, they move towards Thailand. Thailand is a very narrow country. Please look at the map, right? Later, open a world map and see the map of Southeast Asia. Thailand becomes very narrow. It's a very small strip of land, which is not enough to break the cyclonic system. So these cyclonic systems in the Pacific, they easily cross over into the Andaman Sea and enter Bay of Bengal. So you have more possibility of a depression forming in Bay of Bengal because there is a export of cyclones. The cyclonic systems, the depression centers are getting exported from Pacific towards Bay of Bengal. This also plays a role in causing more cyclones in Bay of Bengal as compared to the Arabian Sea. I think now it's very clear, right? Why Bay of Bengal witnesses more intense activity as compared to the Arabian Sea. Now let me explain a very important point. Let's examine the new trend which is being noticed in the North Indian Ocean. What is the new trend? See, earlier trend was Bay of Bengal was witnessing more cyclones. It was also witnessing more intense cyclones. Whereas Arabian Sea would witness less number of cyclones, and most of them were of a lower intensity. This was the earlier trend. Now we are witnessing a change. In Bay of Bengal, things are the same. It hasn't changed in Bay of Bengal. In Bay of Bengal, it remains the same. Bay of Bengal continues to witness a number of cyclones every year, right? Most of them are very intense cyclones that can strike the landmass. But the change is in the Arabian Sea. This is where we are noticing the change. In Arabian Sea as well, we are witnessing more number of cyclones as compared to before. We are also witnessing more intense cyclones as compared to before. This change is believed to be a direct result of climate change. It's believed that the global warming has caused long-term changes to the temperature pressure conditions in the Arabian Sea, which is making it more conducive for breeding tropical cyclones. Essentially, climate change is seen as directly responsible for more such extreme weather events in the Arabian Sea. Is that clear? We have examples to prove that. Cyclone Biparjoy, Cyclone Okchi. These are recent cyclones which have hit the west coast of India. Cyclone Biparjoy, which hit Gujarat just a few months back, and Cyclone Okchi, which hit Kerala a few years ago. Previously, this would never happen. At least in the last 100 years, West Coast was more safe. Even if cyclones formed and hit India, they would be of lower intensity. Now we are witnessing more number of cyclones compared to before, and more intense cyclones forming, which are striking either India or Pakistan or West Asia. The reason is believed to be climate change, the warming of the waters of northern Indian Ocean is seen to be responsible for this new trend that we are witnessing in the Arabian Sea. Is that clear? So this is something you should take note of. So the latest threat, it's not just for the East Coast, but even the West Coast is becoming more and more vulnerable. And it's believed that global warming is responsible for that. Right? As the sea surface temperature has gone up, right, it is causing more evaporation, creating more conducive conditions for the formation of cyclonic activity. So these are some essential points that you should be aware of, both from a geography point of view and also from a disaster management point of view. Now let's see how we can deal with the impact. What can we do with regard to disaster management to deal with the impact of cyclones? Let's approach this in a logical, scientific manner based on the 3 phases of disaster management. By using the disaster management cycle, which includes 3 phases in disaster management, let's see what measures can be taken to mitigate the impact. Because prevention is impossible. You can't prevent a cyclone. It's beyond human control. But through right measures, through better planning, preparedness, through better early warning, through the right structural measures, we can reduce the impact. We can mitigate the impact. One of the most important steps in the pre-disaster phase is to implement a solid early warning system. Of course, risk analysis comes first. You analyze the risk, you understand the hazard and the vulnerability, right? You understand hazard and vulnerability, and you map out the threat. That is the first basic exercise in disaster management. You study the hazard, understand the country's vulnerability and exposure, and put it on a map so that you know which states, which districts are in the line of fire. Once risk analysis is done, immediately a early warning system has to be put in place. So here the nodal agency is again the IMD, the India Meteorological Department. IMD is responsible for predicting heavy rainfall as well. It's responsible for providing warnings with regard to tropical cyclones. So IMD has enough resources. It has satellites. It has a network of Doppler radars to track cloud formation. It has a countrywide and region-wide network of rain gauges and other sensors. So by collecting all the data is crunched through a supercomputer where a weather modeling system is used to predict the intensity of the cyclone and also the likely path of the cyclone. Today, IMD has made so much advances with better technology, better forecasting model, with advancement in supercomputing abilities, that it is able to give very accurate predictions with regard to cyclones. In the last 20 years, we have witnessed a massive change in India. Is that clear? The Odisha super cyclone of 1999, this was a wake-up call for India. It was one of the biggest disasters at that point in time. 10,000 people were killed in Odisha because we had no early warning, right? We weren't prepared. We hadn't planned. There wasn't effective early warning and forecasting systems available. So following this major disaster, India took major steps, especially after the Disaster Management Act was enacted. Right? The disaster management cycle was implemented, a structured response has been implemented, and in the last 20 years, a very effective early warning system has been put in place. So IMD is able to track the occurrence of low pressure depressions in real time with great accuracy. The moment a low pressure depression occurs in the entire North Indian Ocean, it tracks the whole North Indian Ocean, from Bay of Bengal to Arabian Sea to the other parts of the Indian Ocean. Right? This whole region is under the surveillance of IMD, constant surveillance. The moment there is a low pressure depression, immediately IMD keeps track of it. It will estimate the intensity, how it is building up, what is the expected wind speed, what could be the expected rainfall, and the likely path the cyclone is going to take. Based on this, it will even predict the landfall. It will predict the exact time and place of the landfall event. And thus we can know the affected areas before the disaster can happen. Is that clear? This is like a superpower for human beings. We can know the exact time and place and the extent of the damage it's going to cause and which would be the affected areas. So the moment you know this a few days before, you can start taking precautionary measures. Is that clear? These alerts are dispatched in real time. See, it's not just enough to forecast, but you should also provide early warning. You need an effective system in place to disseminate that information. What's the use of simply collecting the information and not distributing it to the right stakeholders? Right? All the concerned authorities, the common public, especially the affected region, they should become aware. They should know that a cyclone is approaching and what measures have to be taken. So IMD, along with NDMA, they have implemented a very effective early warning dissemination system that provides for real-time alerts to the central government, the concerned states, the districts. They will communicate with the media. They'll engage social media as well and all other forms of communication networks, and they'll directly reach out to the people as well. So real-time alerts are distributed to all the stakeholders, right? Your traditional media, like newspapers, TV channels, they should start carrying this news saying the cyclone is approaching, this could be the damage. So we have to be careful, we have to take the precautions as advised by the government. All the concerned ministries, departments, agencies, they have to be put on alert and they should be prepared to deal with the impact. From NDRF to Defense Ministry to Navy, Coast Guard, the Indian Army, right? Indian Air Force, they all have a critical role to play. The moment the alert goes out, Navy and Coast Guard, they will start pulling the fishermen back. They will issue advisories to all the boats and the ships passing through. And fishermen especially are asked to come back immediately. Those who are caught, they are rescued by the Navy and Coast Guard. Is that clear? The state governments, the concerned disaster response forces, right? And the district authorities, they're all put on alert. And we have even created a siren system along the coastline, which will blare, which will start going off the moment the alert is issued. This is a combined system we have created for cyclones and tsunamis. Is that clear? The warning system, right? The forecasting is different. The forecasting technology is different. The institution is also different. But the alert which is given out to the coastal areas is the same. The infrastructure is the same. So a chain of sirens are also installed in sensitive coastal areas where the sirens will start blaring. They'll start going off, warning the fishermen, the coastal communities to move inwards, to leave the low-lying areas and move towards the higher reaches. And we have even built cyclone shelters that will also act as tsunami shelters. Because people who don't have well-built structured houses or pakka houses, right, who live in huts, in kacha houses, they are at risk. They can't stay where they are. They have to abandon their houses, secure all the loose items, and they have to leave their house and go towards a higher place. So this is where the government steps in. The district authorities, led by the DC, the district collector, the SP, the superintendent of police, right? The entire district administration is pressed into service. This is where IAS, IPS officers play a critical role. They lead the district administration in carrying out a timely evacuation, in spreading the message, in urging the people to move out of this area and head towards cyclone shelters. These are large community halls which are built, right? During a normal time, these shelters will act as a government building or a school or a community hall for events and functions to take place. But during times of disaster, when there is a tsunami alert or a cyclone alert, they become shelters where hundreds and thousands of people can be accommodated and they can be looked after by the district administration till the threat passes away. This is a critical measure that India has taken, and we are seeing the results. Today, a very high intensity cyclone will cause deaths not more than single digit or lower double digit deaths. Compared to the 10,000 deaths in the Odisha super cyclone, today in a cyclone, the death rate is in the single digit, right? Under 10, or maybe a maximum of lower double digits. This is a tremendous achievement of India because we have implemented these measures very, very effectively. Is that clear? This requires a lot of training, a lot of practice. It's not just about putting a forecasting system in place and giving real-time alerts and evacuating people to cyclone shelters. It's also about the other measures. How will you manage the flood? How can you restrict human activity? The importance of the natural buffers. Creating structures needed to protect and building the capacity through training, awareness, and also through mock exercises, mock drills. So all these measures have been put in place by India. Under the leadership of NDMA, all these measures have been implemented, which makes India much more secure with regard to the impact of cyclones. Is that clear? we manage the flood waters slightly better. Some structures can be created. You can create coastal walls, create some channels where the flood waters can dissipate without flooding the inhabited areas. Implementing land use planning is critical. That is zoning standards. We have our CRZ guidelines, the coastal regulation zone rules, which you study in environment and ecology. The CRZ rules of the Environment Ministry restricts construction activity and economic activity along the coastline. Right? For a certain distance along the coastline, all construction is prohibited. So industries can't be present, hotels, resorts, villages can't be present at a given distance from the coastline. Right? In the other reaches as well, the construction economic activities are regulated through CRZ guidelines. So the moment you regulate the economic activity in coastal areas through CRZ rules, it will restrict human presence and human activity, thereby safeguarding human lives. Is that clear? It's a very, very important measure. The zoning standards or land use planning measures are critical to regulate human activity and economic activity. Then also planning for alternate livelihood. Now take fishermen for example, right? Their livelihood is uprooted for several months if there is a major cyclone, right? There is a complete ban on fishing. Their boats could be destroyed. Fishing villages could be destroyed. So if they have alternate sources of livelihood, if the government has supported them, right, given them skills, given them alternate jobs, an alternate source of income, then it will reduce the economic damage. It will reduce the financial risk. So all these structural, non-structural measures play a critical role in disaster management. It's all about planning and preparedness, right? So NDMA has come out with a list of do's and don'ts for every disaster. If you visit NDMA's website, you can see the list of do's and don'ts for every single disaster, right? NDMA is telling us what to do, what not to do during times of a disaster, like how to safeguard your building, how to safeguard yourself, how to take protection, right? How to help others, how you can protect your pets and your animals. All these measures are clearly prescribed by NDMA. For every disaster, there is a separate list of do's and don'ts that are given that helps in spreading awareness, and accordingly, training can be provided. See, government alone can't do everything, right? It requires a community action, community response. People in these affected areas, they should know what to do, because every year there will be cyclones. There will be multiple cyclones hitting India. So coastal areas, the districts, coastal districts, they have to be pre-prepared. They should have planned, they should have trained. People should know what to do when the alerts go off. Today, they even get a text message on all the mobile phones in the region. An SMS blast is sent. If any of you are from coastal areas, you would have received these messages, right? NDMA has created this system where the moment IMD gives out an alert, the alert comes on your mobile phone, right? As a text message, as a push notification. The government has worked with telecom service providers and internet service providers to push the alert directly on your mobile phone. Now, this is a very sophisticated system, very simple but sophisticated. Plus mock drills, training, planning, preparedness. This is what helps India to withstand the impact of cyclones. Compared to the damage before, we have done very, very well in reducing the loss of lives and the overall damage to the country. Is that clear? But of course, the threat to infrastructure remains. Our infrastructure is still not resilient enough, especially the old infrastructure. The cities on the coastline, like Chennai, for example, Kolkata, right? They are not disaster proof, even though they are directly in the line of a cyclone, right? These major cities of India, other major projects like road projects, power lines, some seaports as well, airports, they're not completely disaster proof. And this is where India has to work upon. But otherwise, India has done quite well when it comes to disaster planning and preparedness. So during disaster as well, India is very well prepared. During a cyclone, very effective relief and response operations are carried out. The Navy, Coast Guard, NDRF, SDRF, they all play a critical role in search and rescue operations, because fishermen and sailors could be caught in the sea. Then people could get trapped in floods. So it's crucial to rescue them, to search for the people who are trapped and rescue them. Buildings might have collapsed, landslides might have happened. So people who are trapped under the debris, they have to be searched, they have to be rescued. So they should be given basic medical aid. The whole community which is displaced, they should be provided food, shelter, clothing, and other essential assistance, emergency assistance. So here as well, India has shown a very big improvement. We have dedicated forces like NDRF and SDRF, which work with Navy, Coast Guard, and other authorities, especially the district administration. The district administration plays a critical role. They are the ones who maintain the cyclone shelters. They are the ones who help in evacuation, and they are the ones who will plan and provide for the basic necessities during an emergency. Right? So these government entities are playing a very big role in providing effective relief and response. Then in post-disaster, after the disaster, of course, the focus is on providing a larger compensation, ensuring that insurance is dispersed as soon as possible, focusing on reconstruction, rehabilitating the people who are displaced, and aiding the recovery of the region. This becomes the focus in post-disaster management, right? So livelihoods have to be rebuilt. Fishing villages have to be rebuilt. Fishermen have to be given opportunity to repair the fishing boats, or they should get subsidies to buy new fishing boats, right? Then the infrastructure which is damaged, especially road and railway lines, power cables, internet cables, mobile connectivity, they have to be restored immediately, right? So the focus should be on minimizing the socio-economic damage caused by a cyclone. So this is what a government should be doing as part of cyclone management under disaster management. So India has a dedicated initiative known as the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project. Please make a note of this. Our dedicated approach towards cyclone management, right? It's implemented under a program, under a project called National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project. It's funded by the World Bank and involves the government of India and state governments. So together, this critical project has been implemented, and India has done this quite effectively. The National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project is a very big success, as it has reduced the vulnerability of our coastal areas. Both East Coast and West Coast of India are more resilient today compared to 20 years before, thanks to the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project. So all the measures we discussed, they are being implemented, from creating emergency shelters to improving the capacity of the coastal communities, in providing effective alerts, in dealing with the floods, increasing the capacity of government institutions. All these measures have been taken up, right, which allows India to withstand the impact of these devastating cyclones. In fact, India has made so much progress in early warning and forecasting that IMD is designated as the regional nodal center for cyclone warning in the entire northern Indian Ocean. For the entire northern Indian Ocean, IMD of India is the nodal agency. It acts as the Regional Specialized Meteorological Center, RSMC, for all tropical cyclones forming in North Indian Ocean. Is that clear? In fact, there is a global framework for tracking and naming cyclones. For tracking and naming cyclones, there is a global framework created by the World Meteorological Organization. You might have seen in newspapers that every cyclone is given a unique name, right? You have Cyclone Hudhud, Cyclone Biparjoy, Cyclone Okchi. Why do you think these different names are given? Right? Naming the cyclone serves a very important purpose. It helps in easily communicating the threat. See, before the naming system was implemented, cyclones were given a very complex name. They would have an alphanumeric sequence, right, assigned by scientists and experts, which is very difficult to remember, and people won't even understand what alert is coming. Instead, if a simple name is given, right, an easy sounding name is given to it, and if that name is used in all communication, in all the alerts that are being given by the government, by the media, people will become more aware. It's easy to pay attention to the upcoming disaster when a simple name is used for communication. It also helps in documentation and later research as well. So that's why a common framework was created for naming and tracking cyclones under the World Meteorological Organization. So accordingly, the different cyclone breeding grounds are divided into different regions, and there are regional centers around the world which take responsibility for tracking and naming cyclones in that region. Is that clear? You can see how there is a major cyclone tracking naming center in Japan for the Pacific, right? For South Pacific, for the Hawaii region, for Caribbean and North America, for the African region, right? Like this, for North Indian Ocean, for Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea in particular, India is the nodal agency, or IMD. It works with the other meteorological organizations in this entire region. So all the affected countries, they come together and they implement the tracking and naming system. Is that clear? Now, in case of Northern Indian Ocean, which are the affected countries? Bangladesh, Maldives, Myanmar, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Oman, Yemen, Thailand, Iran, even Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and of course, India. Now, all these countries are seen as part of North Indian Ocean as far as cyclones are concerned. So, these countries, they contribute a list of names in their local languages. They will select a list of around 8 names each, which are very simple. They don't go for complicated names. From their local languages that depicts local culture as well. They choose a list of 8 names and they give this as a suggestion to the regional center. Right? In the case of North Indian Ocean, it is IMD, which acts as the regional specialized meteorological center. Now, this list is used on a rotational basis. The names are arranged in a certain order, and one after the other, whenever a cyclone forms in Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal, the names are assigned. All right, so this is a convention, a framework which has been created through World Meteorological Organization. So India would have given a list of names, right? Usually sourced from Indian languages. Bangladesh, UAE, Iran, Pakistan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, all these countries would have contributed a list of names. Then in a certain sequential order, the names are used one after the other. Let's say today there is a cyclone in Bay of Bengal. So the next available name is assigned. Let's say next month, there's a cyclone in Arabian Sea. So the next name in the sequence is taken and assigned to that cyclone. So this naming system helps in easier dissemination of alerts. It makes it more relatable. You'd have seen this during pandemic as well, during COVID-19 pandemic. Initially, when different variants of coronavirus came up, right, the technical parameters were assigned. The new variant would have a very complex name. It would have an alphanumeric sequence, which was very hard for people to remember and understand. That's when the WHO, the World Health Organization, implemented a simple naming system and started giving simpler names for different variants, like alpha variant, delta variant, omicron variant. So then it becomes easy for people to understand, for the media to communicate, and even for the government to communicate the threat. So the same concept applies here. It also helps in future research, in documenting all the data, right? That's why there is a naming system in place. And for North Indian Ocean, IMD is the regional specialized meteorological center. In fact, India provides this as a free service. We assist other countries as part of HADR operations. We share these alerts. India shares alerts with other countries to help them and warn them. This is an integral part of our diplomacy today. Is that clear? Disaster management has become a critical part of India's foreign policy, through which we are projecting soft power. We are helping countries in distress, giving them early warning, giving them all support through HADR operations. HADR stands for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief. All right, it's a technical word. It's an acronym. HADR, I'll repeat, it stands for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief. Through this, we provide disaster management services to all the other countries. We share technology. We give them early warning alerts. Let's say tomorrow there is a tsunami in Indian Ocean. India has the ability to track, and we will give out alerts to all the countries. Let's say there are cyclones forming. We will track them, name them by using the global framework, and immediately give the alerts to all the other countries, including Pakistan. Is that clear? So this is a basic service that India is providing in the region as a regional power. We even dispatch our armed forces, including Navy, Air Force, Army, and NDRF, to help out the affected countries in their search and rescue operations. We supply financial aid, medical aid, food. All the supplies are also given by India as part of these disaster management operations across this region. Is that clear? So India gives out these alerts as far as cyclones in North Indian Ocean is concerned, right? We work with all the affected countries, and we have this naming system in place through which we track the cyclones and give out alerts, share the data with others as well. Got it? So this completes my detailed discussion on tropical cyclones. It is a big topic, but trust me, it's worth spending this time, because you can expect a lot of questions on tropical cyclones. Given that how India is affected by it, it's definitely a favorite topic for UPSC, both in your prelims and in your mains. So I've tried covering all the possible topics under cyclones. So this should help you answer any question which is asked based on tropical cyclones. I hope everything is clear. So now we can move on to the next hazard, that is cloud burst. This is a small topic. All right. So next we'll be studying cloud burst, and we'll also study GLOF, glacial lake outburst flood. Both are relatively smaller topics. So let's understand what is a cloud burst. I've been mentioning this since the first class. While talking about floods, while discussing flash floods recently in Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, I mentioned that the reason behind these flash floods was a cloud burst event. So what do you mean by a cloud burst? Does a cloud really burst apart, right? What does it mean? So that's what we should understand. Cloud burst essentially brings extremely heavy rainfall in a small region over a short period of time. Essentially, this is a cloud burst in a small place. All right, not even a district, not even a village, smaller than that. Let's say in one small hilly area, right? Or in one given location. If there is extremely heavy rainfall, that too in a very short period of time, such an event is called a cloud burst. Is that clear? There is a criteria, there is a threshold which has been identified as well to determine a cloud burst event. But many times it's very hard to exactly point out whether a cloud burst has occurred or not. That's why governments sometimes they jump the gun. They say that heavy rainfall is a cloud burst event. So only IMD can give us clarity over here. IMD has put in place a threshold. There is a criteria which is in place to determine a cloud burst event. But governments often say that even every heavy rainfall is a cloud burst, right? So there is a lot of misrepresentation, misreporting which happens. But let's see technically what is a cloud burst and how we can identify, how we can differentiate regular rainfall from a cloud burst event. All right. So the basic definition is that it's a hazardous state where extremely heavy rainfall is received in a very short period of time that can cause sudden floods or flash floods. That is how it turns into a disaster. All right. Heavy rainfall in a given region, in a small region, in a small amount of time will bring a lot of water, which will obviously cause flash floods. Now let's see how do these cloud bursts occur and what is the criteria to identify. What's the threshold that's been set to see whether a cloud burst has occurred or not. A cloud burst generally occurs in hilly areas. All right, generally. There can be exceptions. Cloudburst can happen in a plain area as well. All right, but usually it does not happen. Cloudbursts generally happen in hilly mountainous areas. For example, towards the Himalayan belt in Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, in Jammu and Kashmir, towards Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh and Northeast India, towards Western Ghats. This is where you have the highest likelihood of extremely heavy rainfall being received in a short period of time in a small location. The rainfall will be so high that it will be the equivalent of many months or many years of rainfall in just 1 hour or 2 hours. All right, that is the extremeness that we are talking about. Now, let's say, I'll take one example. A couple of years ago, there was a major cloud burst that happened in Uttarakhand that caused flash floods and a lot of devastation. All right. The rainfall that was received in that one small region, in one hilly area, was the equivalent of rainfall received across northern India in few months, in 5 to 6 months. You can imagine the volume of water which is dumped during this precipitation. So when such a huge volume of water flows in the downstream, it will cause devastating flash floods. There is no notice at all. See, if regular rainfall is happening and water level is regularly increasing, then you have some time. There is some warning available. We studied this under floods. In monsoon season, flooding is common. So water level slowly builds up over days and weeks. So you know few days before that water levels are dangerous. So you can plan, you can prepare to try and evacuate the people as well. But in case of a cloud burst, there is a very, very short notice. It can happen in a very short span of time, within 1 or 2 hours or 5 to 6 hours. Overnight, things can change. Maybe today evening, everything is normal. The region is dry, there is less water, but within 5 to 6 hours overnight, things can change dramatically. There can be so much rainfall in 4 to 5 hours that there will be a devastating flash flood by morning. So there is hardly any time to evacuate or give an alert or prepare. So as a result, cloud bursts become very, very dangerous in such mountainous, hilly regions. Is that clear? The reason why it occurs is because in mountainous areas, you have something known as orographic lift. Essentially, how the rain-bearing clouds are lifted up through a convection current, right, in the hilly mountainous area, that plays a critical role. Now imagine this to be the hilly area, right? Any hill will have a windward side which receives the maximum rainfall where the clouds precipitate, and there is a leeward side which is the rain shadow area which does not receive any rainfall. Correct? You would have studied this again in geography. I'll not get into that aspect. Now imagine in this situation, which is depicted here in this image, you have rain bearing winds coming in. All right, you have strong wind currents coming in. There are dense rain bearing clouds which hit the hilly slope. Now, because of the temperature pressure difference between the foothills and the peak and the apex, right, between the foothills and the apex of a hilly mountainous area, there is a temperature and pressure difference. So this creates a lift. It creates a convectional current, right, and an orographic lift occurs where the rain bearing clouds are pushed upwards and the right conditions are created where precipitation can easily happen, particularly at the higher reach, right? So these rain bearing clouds, pushed by the winds and the convection current, they easily move upwards, and as they reach the higher reaches, the clouds will precipitate and bring heavy intense rainfall. Sometimes the pressure and temperature conditions can be so extreme that very dense rain bearing clouds that are carrying a lot of moisture, right, they can precipitate, they can cool down all of a sudden, especially when this warm air parcel which is carrying the rain bearing clouds, when it suddenly comes in contact with the colder air mass present at the top of the hill, it results in sudden condensation and precipitation causing very intense rainfall. This is usually accompanied with lightning and thunder activity and even hailstorms. It's a violent interaction, a sudden mixing up of warm, moist winds carrying rain-bearing clouds with a cold air mass at the top of these hills and mountains. So this results in a violent reaction, an instantaneous reaction, causing extremely heavy rainfall in a small region, that too in a short period of time. So when such a large volume of water is dumped, right, the drainage system cannot handle that. The carrying capacity is breached within minutes, within hours, and the water will overflow in the downstream, causing massive flooding in the low-lying areas. So cloudburst essentially causes a flash flood, and that is how it becomes a disaster. Now, this could even trigger the heavy rain, and the floods can also trigger landslides. Because in the slopy area, when such a large volume of water is flowing down at a very high speed, the soil system weakens. It absorbs the water, gets saturated with water. So the structural integrity of the slope weakens and the slope can come crashing down, causing major landslides. So landslide is a secondary disaster here. All right. That is why cloudburst events can be very, very dangerous. They're very volatile, very unpredictable as well. So in the case of India, it is IMD, which is the nodal agency for early warning and forecasting with regard to cloudbursts. It's just like tracking rainfall, but it's not very accurate because this is a very localized event happening in a very small place. See, right now, meteorological agencies around the world, they provide decently accurate estimates for entire countries or entire states or entire districts. It's easier to predict over a larger area. But to give accurate estimation for a small area, you need more radars, more sensors, and localized satellite data, which is all very resource intensive. It's not practical to put in place such a system everywhere. Theoretically, it is possible to predict a cloud burst. Theoretically. All right. On the ground, maybe if you can prioritize some affected areas, some areas which are more exposed and more vulnerable, only in those areas you can install more Doppler radars, more sensors, and provide for localized, customized alerts regarding heavy rainfall. All right. Right now, India and most countries, they're not in that position because the resources needed are extremely high. But in the future, we are planning a more effective early warning system for cloud bursts as well. Through localized data at the level of villages, we can track cloudburst events and give alerts at least few hours before. Even a 5-hour notice, 8-10-hour notice can help in carrying out evacuation of downstream areas. So IMD has defined a threshold. It says that events where rainfall is in excess of 10 centimeters per hour in a small area, such an event which brings more than 10 centimeters of rainfall in a small region, right, that too per hour, such an event is called a cloud burst event. 10 centimeters is very high. Entire cities receive this rainfall over entire year. Is that clear? That is, if you collect all the water and spread it out, it will cover an entire city for 10 centimeters. That is the amount of rainfall received in one whole year. Imagine that much water pouring down in just 1 hour, that too in a very small region. That is why the flash floods happen. All right. So such events are labeled as cloudburst events, particularly occurring in the Himalayan belt, and it can possibly occur in Western Ghats as well, and even in the northeastern parts of India. Is that clear? So that is India's vulnerability. During the monsoon season, under the right conditions, there can be such heavy precipitation in hilly mountainous regions, which is known as a cloudburst event. So what is the impact? It's very easy. I don't even have to mention this. It's exactly the same as that of floods, because eventually cloudburst will cause a flood and landslide. So impact is the same. We did not repeat this point again. It will cause flash floods leading to loss of life, landslides causing soil erosion, destruction of life and property, destruction of infrastructure, heavy silt deposition in rivers that blocks the rivers and causes floods in the future, damage to environment and socio-economic loss. So whatever we studied under floods, the same will apply here as well. We'll discuss the same again in landslides also, right? They're all connected. They're all the same. So please understand the phenomena involved, the process involved in cloudbursts. If you can understand that and understand how early warning forecasting can be provided, then the rest becomes very simple. The other measures are exactly the same as that of floods and landslide management, nothing else. You need structural, non-structural measures to divert flood water, right? To reduce surface runoff, to strengthen the slope to prevent landslides, to build barrier walls that can hold back the landslide from affecting the populated areas. All these are your structural measures, and zoning standards, land use planning, they become your non-structural measures. Everything else is generic. I need not repeat the same point. During disaster, post-disaster, it's all the same steps what we discussed under floods. Got it? The only difference is in the process, the mechanism involved in a cloudburst, why it happens, right? What's the actual impact of it? And is early warning possible? Yes, technically, theoretically, it is possible. All right, theoretically, it is possible. But to make it accurate and to make it customized, you need hyper local data, which means you need more sensors, radars on the ground, especially the highly prone regions can be identified during risk analysis, right? In Uttarakhand, in Himachal Pradesh, in Kerala, in Jammu and Kashmir, we can pinpoint few places, few villages, few hilly areas where cloudbursts and flash floods have happened. Only there we can prioritize and install these radars which are needed and the other sensors and tools which are needed, so that we can provide slightly better estimates and give a few hours notice, at least 24 hours or even 12 hours notice of extremely heavy rainfall, so that timely evacuation can be done. Is that clear? So early warning forecasting is possible. India is working on it. Right now, the challenge is in providing those local estimates. It has to be accurate. To get that accuracy, you need more information. You need more data collection to happen. That means you need more radars, more sensors at the ground level, which is very hard to achieve. Right? It's very resource intensive. Right now, it's easier to give alerts for whole country, for entire states, for even districts. For a large area, it is easier because we have those resources. We have enough satellites, enough Doppler radars, enough ground sensors for that. But to make it hyper local to the level of a small village, to the level of a small hilly area, you need more localized data collection. That is something India and other countries are working on. Is that clear? So this explains what is a cloud burst. It's very simple. Don't don't go deep into it. Not necessary. Just understanding the process, mechanism, and the impact is enough. Everything else is the same as floods and landslides. Right? The disaster management approach is exactly the same as what you do for floods and landslides. Understood? Now, I think we can take a short break. Let's take a short break. We are in the middle of the session. We'll come back and then I'll take your questions, your doubts, and we'll proceed with the discussion. We have a few more disasters to discuss. So let's come back by 7:55. It's almost 7:40. Take a 15 minutes break and I'll see you back at 7:55. So any doubts and questions, please bring it up and I'll try to answer as many as possible. And once we do the questions, then we'll start with the next disaster, that is landslide and avalanches. We'll also discuss GLOF, Glacial Lake Outburst Flood. Right? So these are the upcoming topics. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the session. Now, let's take up some questions and doubts that you have, and then we'll start with the next disaster. Shali is asking, sir, from where is fresh water coming into Bay of Bengal? As I told you, through rainfall. Bay of Bengal gets more rainfall than Arabian Sea. So that brings a lot of fresh water. And more importantly, the east flowing rivers of India, right? We have a lot of east flowing rivers, such as the Ganga and its the whole Gangetic system, the Brahmaputra, right? Then you have all the peninsular rivers. All these east flowing rivers bring a lot of fresh water supply into Bay of Bengal. Next, a student is asking how cyclones get dissipated in the sea. As I told you, the major fuel for a cyclonic system is the constant supply of moisture. Sometimes, if the sea surface temperature is not high enough, and if there is strong wind currents, it will not allow for greater evaporation. So that is when a cyclonic system can die out. A low pressure depression will form and a mildly intense cyclonic system will form, but it will not turn into a super cyclone. It will not turn into a very severe cyclonic storm, because there is an impact on the rate of evaporation due to drop in temperature. So if higher sea surface temperatures are not ideally available, and if there are strong wind currents which are moderating the temperature, there, in such cases, the cyclonic system will dissipate. It will slowly die out in the sea itself. It will not build into a very intense cyclonic system. Ilma is asking, can a cyclone not develop in an enclosed sea? Because western disturbances which occur in winter originate in Mediterranean Sea. See, western disturbances are not cyclonic systems. All right. And also in an enclosed sea, like take Black Sea, for example. Black Sea is completely enclosed, right? It does not have cyclonic activity. The prime reason is for cyclone to form and to collect that amount of moisture, you need large open sea surface. In small enclosed seas, that space is not available, right? So it will not support enough evaporation and it will not support the formation of a low pressure depression. So generally, you don't see cyclonic activity in enclosed seas and such water bodies. Zeba is asking, sir, what if other countries discover a cyclone? Will they share data with other countries? Definitely, yes. Other countries will also have their own meteorological systems. Even they will keep track of cyclonic activity, right? But again, there is no way India can miss. Today, the technology is so advanced that we will track any cyclonic activity in the northern Indian Ocean. But other countries as well will work with India. They will also share data. We will also share data with them and give alerts to them as well. Abhijit is asking, sir, please tell once about watershed management and floodplain zoning. I know it's a doubt from the previous class, but just to give you a basic idea, watershed management is about managing the flow of water in a given drainage basin. Now, let's say you take the Krishna basin, right? The Krishna will have many tributaries. It has a large catchment area. So managing the flow of water in that entire catchment area is watershed management. Now, how do we manage water flow? We manage water flow by building dams, by building embankments, barrages, irrigation canals, right? That is how we hold and store water. We distribute water. This management of water is called watershed management or watershed development. The second part of your question, what is floodplain zoning? I told you that zoning applies for every disaster, right? Zoning is nothing but you identify different zones, different regions, and the risk that they have. Based on the risk areas, you prioritize your disaster management measures and you regulate construction activity and economic activity. Now, let's say the Himalayan belt is very prone to earthquakes, correct? When you implement your zoning standards, you identify that Himalayan belt is dangerous, it's vulnerable. So there you restrict construction or you regulate it. You enforce very strict building codes to ensure that the buildings that come up are earthquake proof. So similarly for floods, through floodplain zoning, you identify the plain areas and zone them into different standards depending on the risk they face. The most low-lying areas and the areas which are most flooded, right, based on historical data, you can classify them as vulnerable zones and impose strict regulations and prohibitions. You can prohibit certain economic activity. You can restrict certain construction and economic activity. So the idea is to ensure we minimize the damage. We ensure that the population is less in the high risk area and sufficient measures are taken and priority is given to those areas which are more vulnerable. So that is where your zoning standards will help. Swapnil is asking, sir, isn't there any scientific method to prevent cloud burst? No, cloud burst can't be prevented. Because see, meteorological phenomena is largely beyond human control, right? We can't really prevent cloud bursts. Anusha is asking, sir, is IMD a nodal agency for entire North Indian Ocean? Yes, IMD is the lead agency. There is a regional specialized meteorological center, right, which is under WMO. So it is headquartered in Delhi. So IMD is the lead agency. We coordinate with all the other meteorological organizations of all the other countries in North Indian Ocean. Kiru Bagar is asking why cloudbursts do not happen in Eastern Ghats. The right conditions don't exist. Usually we don't witness cloudbursts in Eastern Ghats. The Eastern Ghats itself does not receive heavy rainfall as such compared to Western Ghats and the Himalayan ranges. All right. And also the rain bearing clouds, right, and the ideal temperature pressure conditions needed, right, they're not present in the ideal level at the Eastern Ghat ranges. So usually we don't witness cloudbursts in Eastern Ghats. Next, last question. Mohammad Shanwaz is asking, sir, in the National Risk Management System, we talk about mangroves, which is a natural protection from cyclone. Yes, to protect yourself against cyclones, conserving your natural buffers will play an important role. I had mentioned this yesterday as well, right? When you protect your tree cover in the coastal areas, when you conserve your wetlands, when you protect the mangrove forests found in wetlands, they act as a natural barrier. They help in cutting the high speed winds. When cyclone makes landfall and high speed winds are generated, the tree cover and mangrove forests will help in arresting the wind speed. They cut the wind speed, thereby protecting the populated areas. They also absorb the excess water, which is coming through heavy rainfall and coastal flooding. Is that clear? Wetlands, especially where mangrove forests are found, they act like a sponge. They absorb all the excess water coming in, thereby limiting the flooding of populated areas. So mangrove cover acts like a natural defense. It's a natural buffer against cyclones and even tsunamis. Okay, one more question. Kaluri is asking, sir, can flash droughts be predicted with vulnerability and exposure? Flash droughts are very, very hard to predict. See, regular droughts itself is very hard to predict. I told you yesterday, it's hard to determine when a drought is starting, when a drought is going to end, right? Regular droughts, they last over months to few years. If that itself is difficult to predict, it's even more difficult to predict flash droughts that happen within few weeks and few months. But closer observation can give us an indication that there is water scarcity in a certain region due to low rainfall, and we can declare that flash droughts are occurring. But that requires more resource allocation. It requires more research. It requires greater attention to be paid to the drought hit areas to identify these flash droughts that happen very quickly without much notice. But it's very challenging, very difficult. All right. So these were the questions. Now let's proceed with the discussion. Let's take up the next disaster, another small topic, landslides and avalanches. I'm sure by now you already have a fair idea as to what is a landslide, because we have referred to landslides under floods and cloudbursts as well, right? So let me explain once again what exactly is a landslide, what is an avalanche, what are the different types of landslides that we have, and what is the impact and how can we manage the disaster. Landslides are also known as landslips. That's another name for it. They mean the same. You might have seen in newspapers or on the internet, they say that a landslip has occurred or a landslide has occurred. Both are the same. The terminologies are different. That's it. The process, the mechanism is exactly the same. Avalanche is also exactly the same. Only difference is that avalanche occurs in snow-capped mountains. Understood? Whereas a landslide or a landslip or even a rock avalanche, they occur in rocky mountains, in regular mountainous structures where you just have rocks or some vegetation. If in such a place a landslide occurs, we just call it a landslide or a landslip or a rock avalanche, right? Depending on what debris is falling down. But if this phenomena occurs in snow-capped mountains, like Siachen Glacier, for example, right, across the Himalayan belt where you have snow-capped mountains, if there is a sudden slippage of the snow, if ice sheets, if they slip and crash down, we call that as an avalanche or a snow avalanche. So the mechanism and the process is exactly the same. Only difference is that avalanche occurs in snow-capped areas. The slips occurring in regular mountainous areas, we just call it as a landslide or as a landslip. So what happens during a landslide? During a landslide, there is mass wasting. Mass wasting occurs under the influence of gravity in a slopy, hilly, mountainous area. Essentially, the earth material, right, will slide down on the slope and it will crash into the valley. It will crash into the foothills. This sudden movement of earth material down a slope is called a landslide. All right. Now imagine a mountain or a hill, right? On the slope, you might have soil, you will have rocks, boulders. You'll also have some vegetation, including tree cover or forest cover. Now, all this material present on the slope, it might slip all of a sudden and crash into the valley. It can crash into the foothill. This sudden displacement of earth material, this downward movement along the slope is known as mass wasting or a landslip or a landslide. This can happen due to several reasons. We'll discuss the causes later. We'll come to that. But first, understand the process, the mechanism. Is that clear? Because see, the slope of a hilly area is very vulnerable. It's not a very strong structure. The structural integrity of the slope can be compromised due to various reasons. There are natural causes which weakens the integrity of the slope, and the entire earth material present can come crashing down. all the soil, rock, boulders, and vegetation, they can come crashing down, which strikes with great force, causing large-scale devastation in the downhill area. So such an event of mass wasting that happens under the influence of gravity is called a landslide or a landslip. In case of snow avalanche, it's exactly the same mechanism. But what slips down, what slides down is the snow itself, the ice sheets, which are formed due to snow deposition. They are very weak structures. They're loosely held. So any disruption in the structural integrity of the slope can cause the entire ice sheet and snow to collapse and come crashing down, causing a snow avalanche. Got it? Now let's examine the causes. What can cause a landslide? There are many natural causes. We have already studied some of them. Correct? Now you guys tell me, is it possible to have a man-made landslide? Can man-made factors trigger a landslide? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments. Okay, most of them are saying yes. If yes, give me examples. Give me a specific example as to how a man-made event can cause a landslide. Give me one or two examples. Deforestation, very good. Drilling, mining, blasting and explosion during projects, tunneling, in general construction activity, very good. Landslides can be man-made as well, along with the natural causes. So let's take a look at the causes and the different types of landslides that occur. The natural causes include heavy rainfall, or even rapid melting of the snow and the glaciers. Now imagine in a hilly slopy area there is extremely heavy rainfall or a cloud burst has occurred, right? So there is a large volume of water that is flowing down the slope. So the water will percolate into the soil, right? The soil becomes saturated with water. And as a result, the top layer of the slope loses its structural integrity. So it comes under the influence of gravity, and gravity can pull down that entire sheet of soil along with everything that is present on top of it. So rocks, boulders, vegetation, even houses and buildings that are present, everything can be pulled down as a result of this slip or mass wasting that occurs. So heavy rainfall, cloud bursts, and even rapid melting of snow and glacier. This is a prime reason, and of course global warming is contributing to it. The climate change that we have triggered, right, through emission of greenhouse gases, it has increased global temperatures and it is melting snow caps and ice caps and glaciers at a faster rate. So if more snow and ice caps are melting and there is more water flowing down the stream, right, along with that, if there is heavy rainfall, this can saturate the soil, weaken the integrity of the slope, and everything can come crashing down. Another possible reason is the rising groundwater pressure. In certain slopy areas, water can rise up due to capillary action. Groundwater can rise upwards towards the soil and it can dampen the soil. All right? There are underground aquifers, which is part of the groundwater table. From these underground aquifers, water level can rise. And when these waters percolate through the pores and dampen the soil, when they dampen the soil could become saturated with water. So even this will weaken the soil's integrity and the slope might slip, right? All the material present, the earth material can slip and crash, thus causing a landslide. So the rising groundwater level from the underground aquifers could also be a potential reason. Next, absence of vegetation. See, tree cover and the presence of vegetation on a slope is good for the structural integrity of the slope, because the roots of plants, trees, and even grass that is present, it helps in holding the soil together. It also helps in cutting the speed of the water. It reduces surface runoff. It reduces the speed with which water is flowing down a slope. Now imagine if the tree cover has been destroyed due to a forest fire. Let's say during summer season, right, due to heavy heat, due to extreme heat, there was a natural forest fire which has burnt the entire vegetation. Now, without any vegetation present on the slope becomes vulnerable during rainy season. Even a regular rainfall that brings fast flowing water down the slope can weaken the soil structure, causing a landslide. So presence of vegetation and tree cover is important to strengthen the structural integrity of the slope. Is that clear? So this can be a natural cause. The vegetation could be destroyed naturally due to forest fires. Similarly, erosion of the slope by rivers and tidal waves in coastal areas. Landslides can happen in coastal areas as well, where you have mountainous regions along the coastline. For example, Australia, United Kingdom, Scotland, right? They, even in California, you have coastal areas where you have these cliffs that are present. You have towering hilly mountainous regions right next to the coastline. Indonesia is another example. So in such places, the rock material can slip. The structural integrity of the mountain could be compromised due to weathering, due to erosion over millions of years. So as a result of the action of water and wind, because of these natural elements which are acting on the slope, there could be long-term erosion which weakens the integrity of the structure, and the slope can slip and slide and crash into the downhill area. Is that clear? Now let me tell you something very interesting. In case of a coastal landslide, it can even trigger a tsunami. A small tsunami can be triggered by a massive landslide. Is that clear? If the mountain structure collapses into the sea, directly into the sea, it pushes the water, and in the nearby areas and the islands, there can be a small tsunami wave, which becomes a secondary disaster. So weathering and erosion is also a natural factor. Next, the most common factor, earthquakes. Earthquakes of higher magnitude, let's say magnitude 6, 7, 8, and 9. These earthquakes, which cause trembling of the surface, they induce a shock wave in the slopy areas. This can destabilize the slope, thus crashing the earth material into the downhill area. We frequently witness this in the Himalayan belt, from Afghanistan to Pakistan to India to Nepal, right across the entire Himalayan stretch. It's a seismically very active zone because the Indian plate is constantly diving under the Eurasian plate. All right, we'll discuss more about that under earthquakes. So the whole Himalayan belt is seismically very, very active. So any earthquake in such a region, in a hilly mountainous region, can destabilize the slope, causing a major landslide. Especially rock, boulders, they can roll down easily and they can come crashing down. Or the entire slope might slip and bring all that material down into the downhill region. Then another reason would be volcanic eruptions. Is that clear? Volcanic eruptions are very violent, right? Hot lava and magma and gases, they are thrown out, they're expelled during a volcanic eruption, and this induces tremors across the hilly mountainous area. So this can also trigger a landslide. We see this happening very regularly in Indonesia and also in few South Pacific island countries where you have active volcanoes. Whenever there is a volcanic eruption, right, there is hot lava magma flowing down the slope. Plus the explosion itself would have caused a lot of tremors, right? Volcanoes and earthquakes are interconnected as well. So these events can weaken the slope's structure and it can cause a landslide. Got it? So many natural factors are responsible. In a way, forest fires contribute to it because of removal of vegetation, earthquakes, heavy rainfall that causes floods and flash floods. Then volcanic eruptions, weathering and erosion, all these natural causes can cause landslides. Is that clear? We can even witness underwater landslides. Because under the seas and the oceans, we have mountainous structures present. So even underwater, there can be a landslide which can in turn trigger a tsunami. Many students have a wrong assumption that the sea floor is a plain flat bed. That's not the case. Just like you have a terrain and topography on land, even underwater, there is a terrain, right? There is a topographical feature. You have hills, mountains, and valleys and trenches, even on the seabed. So there are large underwater mountainous structures where the material can slip, the slope can weaken, and it can crash, causing a mini tsunami. It can trigger tsunamis, which becomes a secondary disaster. Understood? So all these are natural causes. Now please look at this slide. You can see a lot of images that I've added. It depicts different types of landslips. You can see a snow avalanche where snow has come crashing down in a snow-capped mountain. Right? All the snow and ice which has accumulated at the top. This can weaken due to various natural factors which we discussed. And the integrity of the ice sheets can be compromised. So even a small trembling or a shaking of the slope can induce a major snow avalanche, pushing all the snow into the downhill region. It will crash down. Similarly, there can be a rock avalanche in dry rocky mountains. Rock and boulders can slip. Rock and boulders and stones, they can slip and they can crash. And this is called a rock avalanche. It all depends on what is the debris, what material is crashing down. So if the debris is just rock and boulders, we call it a rock avalanche. If the debris is mainly snow, it's called a snow avalanche. All right? And sometimes it's just referred to as a debris avalanche when soil and vegetation comes crashing down, as you can see in this image. Look at this image. You can see the impact. You can see the damage. This is a very large mountain structure and an entire slope has been removed. Look at the tree cover. Entire trees and the soil and the rocks and boulders, everything has come crashing down. Now imagine what will happen to the villages present here. What will happen if there is a road? What will happen if people are present here? Right? They'll get crushed under the debris. This is where the damage happens. This is where the hazard becomes a disaster. Clear? And landslides can trigger secondary, tertiary disasters as well. As I told you, in coastal areas and under the seas and oceans, landslides can trigger tsunamis. Similarly, landslides can create a natural dam which blocks the river. The flow of water in a river can be blocked. Lot of waste and sediments can get collected, right? All the soil and rocks and vegetation which has crashed into the river valley It can block the flow of water, thus forming a natural dam. So as water accumulates behind it, a lot of pressure will be exerted on the natural dam. It's a temporary dam-like structure. It cannot hold that pressure. So after some days or some weeks, it might break, it might rupture, which again triggers flash floods in the downstream. So you should be aware of this complex interconnection where secondary, tertiary disasters can also happen. Is that clear? Now coming to the man-made causes. How do we contribute to landslides? There are many ways in which we humans contribute to landslides. We have aggravated the natural risk. One of the biggest reasons is deforestation, right? We destroy the tree cover and forest cover due to agriculture, construction, urbanization. Uttarakhand is a classic example. In Uttarakhand, there is exploitative tourism. There are so many recreational sites in Uttarakhand, so many pilgrimage centers. Millions of people visit Uttarakhand for tourism, right? And honestly, it has become exploitative. This has put tremendous stress on the ecology. We have built hotels, resorts, roads in hilly, slopey areas by destroying the tree cover and forest cover. Then agriculture, especially slash and burn agriculture, also called jhum cultivation, right? Farmers, they deliberately set fire to the forest to clear the forest land, and they keep shifting the cropping area, right? Every time they keep setting fire to the cropping land and they keep shifting the cropping land. So such unsustainable cultivation, construction activity causes large-scale deforestation, which weakens the slope. It will allow water to flow at a faster rate, increasing the runoff, causing more saturation of the soil. So during rainy season, when heavy rains are received or when floods are happening, this slope will easily, it will lose the integrity and it will crash, causing a landslide. Then large vehicular activity, usage of large earth moving machines, earth moving equipment, blasting and mining, which is all a result of industrial activity, can also cause landslides. In hilly areas, to provide for connectivity, we try building roads, railway lines, bridges, tunnels, right? To carry out these projects, what do? We carry out blasting wherever needed. There are several mining projects present in hilly, slopey areas, which also involves controlled explosions. Clear? We use tunnel boring equipment to create tunnels. We bring heavy earth moving equipment like JCBs, bulldozers, cranes, etc. Along with that, there can be heavy vehicular traffic, large trucks carrying a lot of goods. So all such activity, movement of heavy vehicles, usage of earth moving equipment, blasting, mining activity, they can all destabilize the slope, causing a major landslide. All right. So earthwork and construction is a prime factor, a major reason. In general, agricultural activity is also responsible, where we clear the forests, natural forests are cleared, and we grow trees on our own, we grow crops. This weakens the whole ecosystem itself. It weakens the soil, right? So during rainy season, during earthquakes, the slope becomes even more vulnerable, causing more landslides. So the spreading urbanization in the hilly region is a major factor because we have degraded the land. We have opened up the slopes for more weathering, more erosion, and they are directly exposed to the impact of floods and heavy rainfall. So as a result, we humans have directly contributed to landslides. Is that clear? So please make a note of this. It's very, very important because India witnesses a number of landslides every year. UPSC has already asked questions on this. So even going forward, you can expect questions on landslides. What is a landslide? How is it different from snow avalanche? What factors cause a landslide? what is India's vulnerability, right? In which regions of India can we witness landslides? So such basic questions can be anticipated. Now, please look at the map. This is the hazard map, hazard vulnerability map of India. It is depicting the regions which are most prone to landslides in the country. All right. So according to the data, the Himalayan belt stretching across Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, Sikkim, and Northeast India, and as well as Western Ghats, they're all highly prone to landslides. In the Nilgiri ranges, for example, right? In the Sahyadri ranges of Karnataka and Maharashtra and Goa, in the Malabar range of Kerala, heavy rainfall can easily trigger landslides. There is massive urbanization, destruction of forest cover in the Western Ghats due to agriculture and industrial activity. This has made the slopes of Western Ghats very, very vulnerable. Same with Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, and Jammu and Kashmir. Rapid construction, destruction of forests, deforestation, they have aggravated the risks. So any earthquake, any cloudburst or flash floods can trigger landslides. Same with Northeast India. Is that clear? So apart from these regions, there's one more region in Eastern Ghats where landslides are witnessed. Can you see this small dot over here? This red colored dot. This is in Eastern Ghats. Even here, landslides are seen. This region is the Araku Valley of Andhra Pradesh. It's present near Vishakhapatnam, next to Vizag region. In the Eastern Ghats, you have this valley called Araku Valley in Andhra Pradesh. It's very similar to Western Ghats. All right. In fact, since colonial times, there are plantation crops that are cultivated here. Plantation crops are grown, just like Western Ghats. So Araku Valley receives considerable rainfall. You have hilly, mountainous, slopy areas. So here as well, landslides can occur. So according to data that's available, Northeast India faces the biggest risk, followed by Northwest Himalayas, covering Uttarakhand, Himachal, and Jammu and Kashmir, and then the Western Ghats, covering Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. These are the regions which are most vulnerable, the most affected. All right, so please remember this in the same order. Highest risk is in Northeast India, followed by Northwest Himalayas, then Western Ghats, finally Araku Valley. So it's a very important point for your prelims. So around 12.6% of India's land area is prone to landslide hazard. If you exclude the snow-capped regions, which comes under snow avalanche, if you exclude the snow-capped areas of Himalayas, 12.6% of India's land area is prone to landslides. Now, how do we manage this disaster? Can we prevent it? Yes, in some cases, prevention is possible, especially with regard to man-made causes, man-made factors, right? We can avoid them, we can restrict them. So landslides can be prevented. We can take some structural measures as well. We can strengthen the slope through better engineering. We can create retention walls and barriers to hold all the material which is slipping to protect the populated areas. So through certain measures, we can prevent the impact. But mitigation is the focus, because every time we can't prevent. So mitigation, reducing the impact, is the focus. So as part of disaster management cycle, first what we need is early warning systems. Yes, with regard to landslides, early warning is possible through accurate geological studies and geological data. You can predict the risk of landslides. See, we may not be able to provide exact time and place, but at least some of the slopes which are weaker, which are at greater risk, can be identified through better studies and through better data collection. This again requires localized data, data which is hyper local to the level of each slope, each village, right? At that level, if that hyper local data is harnessed, and if we use the right technology, we can point out some of the slopes which are at the highest risk of landslides. And accordingly, we can take some preventive and mitigative measures. So based on risk analysis, where you study the hazard, you study the vulnerability of the country, you understand the exposure of the country, of different parts of the country. So through risk analysis and early warning, you can come out with very reliable maps, hazard vulnerability maps, through which you can plan and start taking preparedness measures. One major step will be a non-structural measure. You don't have to build anything. You don't have to create any structures. You can simply achieve results through a policy, through government policy, through government rules, regulations. We can achieve a huge impact with regard to landslides. That is, we create a zoning map. We come out with zoning standards, and accordingly we can prohibit and regulate construction and certain human activities. This will be a very, very important step. For example, in vulnerable areas of Uttarakhand, we can restrict the number of tourists visiting every year. You can put a cap on the number of tourists entering the state, right? You can restrict construction, especially construction of houses, hotels, resorts, homestays. They can be regulated or prohibited or restricted. Some large projects, right? In that case, you can impose higher standards of construction. Let's say a strategic road has to be built. We can't avoid. A strategic tunnel has to be created. But we can mandate those who are executing the project, we can mandate them to follow very strict standards of engineering and construction to strengthen the slope, to ensure that we don't weaken the slope's integrity due to explosions, blasting, and moving of heavy vehicles and equipment. By following better measures in construction, by enforcing higher standards of engineering safety, we can protect the integrity of the slope. To do this, you need zoning standards. You have to implement land use planning. Is that clear? In the vulnerable states, how the land will be used in the slope areas, in the hilly areas, has to be strictly regulated. Now, this is where India is lacking. We have the regulations. We have identified the zones. Problem is in enforcement. The state governments, local authorities, they're not enforcing the standards. They're allowing illegal construction, encroachment to happen, right? Which is causing deforestation, which is weakening the slope. And this naturally causes landslides. So the key challenge here is to first come out with strict zoning regulatory standards, and then you enforce them very strictly. And parallelly, we can promote afforestation, strengthen the tree cover, right? Try and revive the natural forests. Don't rely on agriculture. Don't rely on cultivated forests. They will not help you. Promote environment conservation. Promote the revival of the natural vegetation, which adds strength to the slope. The roots will play a critical role in holding the soil and the slope together. So these measures can be taken along with the construction of barriers and retention walls where human habitation is already present. Right? In every place, we can't shift the human population. That's not possible. So at least we can protect some areas, some high risk areas, by constructing retention walls and barriers which can hold the material which is slipping down. Ensure that it doesn't crash into a village or into a small town that is present. You can even strengthen the slope through better engineering interventions. Got it? So such structural measures can also be implemented in some places to strengthen the slope and to retain the debris so that it does not crash into the populated area. So these are the basic measures you take in disaster management as part of your planning and preparedness, right? So this is your pre-disaster phase. Then during and post-disaster, it's exactly the same. During disaster, what do? You provide for better relief, better response. When a landslide occurs, ensure that you have specialized teams. You should have a dedicated specialized force like NDRF. They should have the right resources and training and the right equipment to remove the debris, clear all the material, and search for people who are trapped and rescue them. Right? Provide effective medical aid, provide basic assistance to the affected population during disaster. Then after the disaster, you obviously focus on reconstruction and recovery. Rehabilitate the affected people, right? Many people would have lost their homes, agricultural fields could be destroyed, cattle could be lost, livelihoods would be destroyed. So try and rebuild everything that has been damaged. Infrastructure will suffer a lot of damage. Roads, bridges, railway lines, power cables, mobile towers, they could all be destroyed during a landslide. So try and rebuild them with better techniques, with sustainable methods, and ensure the recovery of the affected region. That is a long-term measure under post-disaster implementation. Is that clear? So the last point, India has recently launched a major initiative to map out the landslide-prone areas with great detail. See, we have a hazard vulnerability map, but it's only telling us which states, which districts are vulnerable. But that is not enough for implementing early warning. To implement early warning, we need specific data for every slope, for every hill and mountain. So that exercise is being undertaken under the National Landslide Susceptibility Mapping Program. It's a very, very big initiative led by National Disaster Management Authority, Geological Survey of India, even ISRO, IMD. They're all involved in this massive project. By using various technological tools like satellites and drones, the geology of the mountain slope areas is being studied to create a national database. This data will be marked with the location. For specific hills and mountains, the slope's integrity is being studied. Is that clear? Especially in areas where more landslides are happening, right? Based on past record, based on historical record, certain slopey areas have been given more priority under this mapping project. So hyper-local data is being developed. By using satellites and drones and geological studies, slopes integrity is being studied where we can flag the slopes with the highest risk. And accordingly, we can plan, we can implement zoning standards. If required, we can evacuate the people. We can prohibit all human activities. So to implement this, the National Landslide Susceptibility Mapping Program has been started. It's an ongoing exercise, right? Many institutions are involved, as I told you, the Geological Survey of India, NDMA, IMD, ISRO, they're all involved in this exercise. And this initiative will help us identify at least few specific mountainous regions which are more vulnerable, which have an immediate risk of facing landslides. This could lay the foundation. It could lay the foundation for a potential early warning system, at least in some places, if not everywhere. At least in the most vulnerable places, we can implement an early warning system in the future. Theoretically, it is possible, and that's why India is working on this. So this database, which will have a repository of all the essential data for important slopes, right? That will become a foundation for building a early warning system in the future, right? So these are the major initiatives that India has taken to manage the impact of landslides. Now, before I end this topic, I would like to give one example, one case study based on a recent disaster that happened in 2021, just a couple of years ago. It's called the Chamoli disaster in Uttarakhand. Let me explain what happened. Chamoli is a place in Uttarakhand. All right. Here you are seeing a satellite image. So at this place, there are two major rivers. You can see the rivers here in the map, in the satellite picture. You can see the Rishi Ganga river and the Dholi Ganga river. All right. These are major rivers of the Gangetic system, right, that flows down from Uttarakhand. You can see the Raini village, which has a very big population. You can also see a hydropower plant, the Tapovan hydropower station, which is still under construction. All right. So here on 7th February 2021, there was a massive flash flood that occurred without notice, without any alert, without any prior notice. All of a sudden, there was a massive flash flood in the Rishi Ganga, Dholi Ganga rivers that destroyed the downstream area. There was large-scale destruction. Even the hydropower plant was damaged. Many workers were trapped, and many people were killed in this disaster. But initially, we could not pinpoint the source. We couldn't identify why the flash flood occurred. There was no heavy rainfall which could have triggered a flash flood. No cloud burst. Is that clear? Initial estimates showed that the region hadn't received heavy rainfall in the last few days. It hadn't seen any cloud burst as such. So the flash flood took everyone by surprise. So the initial conclusion was that, initial assumption was that it had occurred because of a GLOF event. That was the initial assumption. GLOF stands for Glacial Lake Outburst Flood, which is the next topic for our discussion. Right now, don't worry what is GLOF. I'll explain that. I'll come to that. That's the next topic. So experts initially indicated, even the government made an initial assumption that it might have happened because of a GLOF event. Maybe a glacial lake in the remote Himalayan ranges might have burst, causing a sudden flash flood without any notice. But later studies disproved this assumption. Later studies that was conducted in the next few days and few weeks gave us concrete evidence as to why the flash flood had happened. It was not because of GLOF event, not due to heavy rains or cloud bursts. It was because of a massive rock avalanche. Essentially, it was a massive landslide. The scale of this was unthinkable. All right. What happened was, there is a European constellation of satellites called the Sentinel satellites, which India makes use of to study disaster management, right? These European satellites, they captured some very valuable pictures which helped us in understanding why the disaster had happened. The before and after images were very clear. You can see, look at this box here, this place, which is zoomed here. A massive piece of rock and ice had slipped due to weathering, erosion, it had weakened. This huge piece of rock and ice had crashed into the river in one sudden motion, thus triggering a mini tsunami. Right? The water in the river flooded. That's why the flash flood happened. This massive crash of this rock material along with snow and other debris, this is what triggered the massive landslide. The satellite pictures confirmed the slip that had occurred over here. A huge piece of rock and ice had slipped entirely, broken apart, and it had crashed into the rivers below, causing these sudden, unexpected flash floods, which became a major disaster. All right? So this is an example of a landslide. We see this happening very regularly. Even Kerala was very badly affected. In the last few years, Kerala has been very badly affected by floods during the monsoon. Right? These floods, they cause multiple landslides in Kerala. So it's not just a natural factor, it's a man-made factor as well. Because in Kerala, there is rampant urbanization, destruction of forests, exploitative tourism. Right? Because of all this, the flash floods easily trigger landslides in Western Ghats. Another example is Madikeri in Karnataka. That is Coorg, a popular hill station. Even here there is destruction of forests, there is rampant construction, over-exploitation. So during the monsoons, when there is heavy rainfall, it triggers multiple landslides in the Coorg district. We see this happening in Goa and Maharashtra as well. Just few days back, there was a major landslip in Maharashtra where many people were killed. It has become very common in Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh region. In the last few weeks, in the last 2 months especially, there have been many incidents of heavy rainfall and cloudbursts that has caused flash floods, which has also triggered massive landslides in this belt. Is that clear? So India is very, very vulnerable. These pockets, especially, even the northeast region, is very vulnerable. So please pay attention to these recent disasters which are happening. The ones that have happened in the last few months, in the last few years, they are very important for the exam. What you can do is you can take them as examples, as case studies, quote them in your answer while explaining the concept. When you're explaining the static part, bring the dynamic portion as well. Add that current affairs. Show the evaluator that you're able to link current affairs with the static portion. That is how you write good answers in mains. You have to interlink your current affairs with your static knowledge. Is that clear? So this completes my discussion on landslides. I hope everything is clear. It's a simple topic, but there are some important points that you have to pay attention to. All right. Now let's take up the next hazard, that is GLOF, Glacial Lake Outburst Flood. GLOF stands for Glacial Lake or Glacier Lake Outburst Flood. Let's see what is this hazard, why it happens. If you understand the process and mechanism, everything else is the same as floods and landslides. We don't have to repeat that. The impact and the disaster management part of it is exactly the same as flash floods and landslides. All right? Because GLOF is the primary disaster, which in turn triggers floods and landslides. as secondary and tertiary disasters. So just understand the process, the mechanism, that is more than enough. How do we manage the disaster? What is the impact? That is exactly the same as that of floods and landslides. Because GLOF events, they primarily cause floods and landslides, right? That is when it becomes a disaster. All right. Now let me explain what is this event? How does it occur? Where can it occur? Right? That is the focus. As the name itself indicates, it's the burst of a glacial lake. So obviously it can't occur anywhere. It can't occur anywhere and everywhere. It occurs only in snow-capped mountainous areas like the Himalayan mountains, right? So there are many mountain ranges in the world like the Alps, the Andes, etc. You have these snow-capped mountain ranges where glaciers are present. A glacier is nothing but a large block of frozen ice. Understood? The Himalayas of India is often referred to as the third pole of the world because after the Arctic and the Antarctic, after North and South Pole, the Himalayas is said to hold the third highest concentration of water, the third highest presence of ice glaciers. There are thousands of glaciers present from Afghanistan till Myanmar, covering Tibet, that is China, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, right? So across this region, there are multiple glaciers present in the higher reaches of the Himalayan mountains. Now, these glaciers, they are obviously melting. They melt naturally as well during the summer season, all right? But we have accelerated the melting process due to global warming. There is evidence to prove this, that man-made climate change, which has increased global temperatures, has accelerated the melting of ice caps and glaciers, which is weakening the structure of the glacier. All right. Now, what happens is that, see, this is a glacier, this massive ice sheet. This massive ice sheet that you see here, that is a glacier. So this glacier will obviously melt naturally as well. And we have accelerated the melting process. So when a glacier melts, the water accumulates at the bottom, at the foothill of the glacier, and it forms a water body. This is a glacial lake. So at the edge of the glacier, all the water which is coming out, right, due to the melting of the ice, it accumulates in a large water body, which becomes a lake, a pond or lake-like structure, and this is called a glacial lake. Now, this glacial lake can burst. It can burst due to several reasons. There are many factors which can cause the glacial lake to break open, causing massive floods and landslides in the downstream area. Is that clear? There are many causes that can cause the burst of this glacial lake. For example, heavy rain. Heavy rain can lead to over accumulation of water, and the excess water can put so much pressure at the edges that these leaves and embankments, they can break apart, causing a sudden displacement of water. A large volume of water can get displaced suddenly due to heavy rainfall that can breach the natural embankment. The natural embankment can breach due to heavy rainfall in the region. Is that clear? Or even accelerated melting can cause this. Accelerated melting of the snow and the ice can also breach the embankment, right? So this glacial lake will burst open and the water will gush down the stream, causing flash floods and landslides. Essentially, it's like a dam, a large natural dam which is holding a lot of water. Suddenly, if it breaks apart, obviously in the downstream area, there will be a flood and a landslide. The other factor responsible could be an avalanche. What if the snow that has accumulated at the peak, what if it slips and crashes into the glacial lake? Right? It triggers a tsunami like event. It pushes the water suddenly out, bursting the glacial lake, causing floods and landslides down the stream. That's also a reason. Next, earthquake can also be a potential reason. Since Himalayas is prone to earthquakes, a massive earthquake can breach the embankment. The embankments are usually a little weak. The structure can be breached, causing a complete break of the lake, which pushes the water down, causing floods and landslides. So all these factors could be responsible. Avalanche or just a landslide, heavy rainfall, earthquakes, sudden melting of the glacier and the snow and the ice cap. Any of these reasons or a combination of them could be responsible for the burst of a glacial lake. So as the glacial lake breaks open, the water will come gushing down the stream, triggering flash floods and landslides. Is that clear? So that is the process behind a GLOF event. Understood? It can happen anywhere where glacial lakes are present. These natural glacial lakes, which are like a natural dam, they can burst open due to these factors. Most of it are natural factors, but we humans have contributed to it. We have aggravated the process through global warming and climate change. Now, if you look at the Himalayan belt, you can understand India's vulnerability. Studies have shown that there are 25,614 glacial lakes in the 5 major river basins that originate in the Himalayas. There are 25,000 plus glacial lakes. All right? Majority of them are in the Brahmaputra basin. That is from Tibet towards Bhutan and Northeast India. So in the Brahmaputra basin, that's over here, this is where we have the highest concentration of glacial lakes in the Himalayan belt. This is followed by the Indus basin towards India and Pakistan. That is roughly over here. All right. Then you have the Ganga basin covering India and Nepal. Then you have the Amu Darya basin towards Pakistan and Afghanistan and Central Asia. And finally, we have the Irrawaddy basin, which is towards Myanmar, Northeast India, and China. Myanmar, northeast of India, and China. That becomes the Irrawaddy basin towards the east. So there are 5 major river basins across the Himalayan belt and the plains that are present below that. So in these river basins, they are essentially fed by these Himalayan glaciers from Amu Darya to Indus to Ganga, Brahmaputra, and Irrawaddy. All these major river systems are fed by Himalayan glaciers. There are thousands and thousands of glaciers. We have a total of 25,000 plus glacial lakes, and majority of the concentration is in Brahmaputra basin, followed by Indus basin. So these glacial lakes can burst due to the reasons we discussed, and it can trigger flash floods and landslides, which could affect all these countries. All right. So few Central Asian countries like Tajikistan, then Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, they're all at risk for the impact of GLOF events. Understood? So NDMA has brought out a set of guidelines on how to deal with GLOF events. First and foremost, we have to study the risk, conduct a thorough risk analysis, develop the hazard vulnerability map, which is specific to India. That is our first focus and priority. So we are using technology. We are using advanced satellites and drones that are equipped with synthetic aperture radar, also known as SAR. All right, it's a type of payload. It's a type of imaging equipment. It's like a camera which is placed on board satellites and drones. I'm sure some of you would have heard about synthetic aperture radar, right? If you've studied science and technology, or if you're in touch with current affairs, you'll know what is a synthetic aperture radar. This imaging equipment has a tremendous capability. It can provide very high resolution images. And it is much better than your optical cameras. See, generally in Earth observation satellites, optical cameras are used with optical lenses, optical instruments. But optical cameras have a limitation. They can't take good images during night time when it is dark. They function well only during daytime. And they can't look beneath the cloud cover. If there is cloud cover present on a region, right, optical cameras are useless. They won't give you good images. This is where synthetic aperture radar comes in. It uses radio frequencies, radio waves, to take high resolution pictures even during the night. And it can even penetrate cloud cover. So this payload has a dual application. It has military application as well. It is used for monitoring the enemy troop movement and deployment. It's used for border security, border management, to check infiltration, to counter terrorism. It is also used for civilian applications like disaster management. So with regard to disasters like GLOF, landslides, cloudbursts, such technology can be very, very crucial. It can provide us with constant surveillance, high resolution pictures during nighttime, during cloud cover as well, that can help us map out the risk, understand the threat, understand the vulnerable areas. Based on that, we can take some structural measures. We can try to strengthen the embankment of a glacial lake which is facing the highest risk. Through geological studies, right, we can determine which glacial lake is more vulnerable. Out of the 25,000, a few thousand are of direct concern to India, because many of them are in towards Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and other countries. But we can prioritize the ones which are of concern for India, study them in detail, create better maps, understand the risk by deploying the technology, and then implement some structural measures to strengthen the embankments of the weakest glacial lakes, or at least deploy sensors near the most vulnerable glacial lakes, so that we have some early warning when a glacial lake is breached, it will give us some hours notice. We might get maybe 6 to 12 hours before the flood occurs. And that is precious time during which we can give out alerts and evacuate the people in the downstream area. Right? So this is something India is working on. It's a futuristic project. It will not happen in few years. It might take a lot of time, because just like landslides, cloudbursts, it's very, very hard to predict or to forecast a GLOF event. Again, you need local data, right? You have to deploy those ground sensors. You have to conduct intense studies using technology. So theoretically, it is possible, and that is what NDMA has suggested as well. So India will work on this in the coming days. We are already working on this, right? Trying to understand glacial lakes, the topography, trying to point out the most vulnerable ones, so that we can strengthen the embankment through structural measures, and we can put in place some early warning sensors that can give us an alert about a flash flood in these higher reaches of the Himalayas. Next, everything else is the same. It's the same as floods and landslides. I need not repeat those points, like land use planning, regulating construction activity, right? Then creating flood diversion, diverting the flood waters to cut the surface runoff, creating retention walls, right? All these are basic measures, along with capacity building, better training, better awareness. All these are very generic measures that you can suggest in disaster management. So focus more on what is GLOF, how does it occur, where does it occur, what is the risk faced by India, and how can we provide early warning. So if you can understand this, everything else is the same as floods and landslides. Is that clear? So this completes my discussion regarding glacial lake outburst flood. Is that clear? Now let me take up some questions and doubts for a few minutes, and in the remaining time, we can start the next topic. I'll be starting with heat waves and cold waves. That is the next disaster we are going to study. We can just get an introduction today and we can complete this tomorrow, right? We have few more disasters to go. We have earthquakes, forest fires, man-made disasters, etc. We'll wrap it up tomorrow, and the last class will be for the global framework, the UN-led international framework, and the disaster management architecture in India. So this is what we are left with. First, let me take some questions and doubts, and then for 10 minutes, I'll give an introduction, and rest we can resume tomorrow. Zeba is asking, sir, could not understand how avalanches cause GLOF. See, please understand the mechanism. It's very simple. Take a bucket of water, right? Let's say bucket is filled with water. Now take a big piece of rock, right? Or take any debris and drop it into the bucket. What will happen? The water will spill. There will be a sudden burst of water that floods the nearby region. The same thing happens in a water body when something crashes into it. Is that clear? In a coastal area, if there is a cliff which crashes and causes a landslide, it triggers a mini tsunami. The same happens with the mountainous areas in a glacial lake. If there is a snow avalanche or a landslide, and if all the debris crashes all of a sudden into the glacial lake, right, what will happen? The water gets pushed. A mini tsunami-like event is triggered, which bursts the lake and causes floods and landslides. So once you get this idea behind the mechanism, it's very simple, very easy to understand what happens. Godavari is asking, what is National Remote Sensing Center? National Remote Sensing Center, NRSC, it's one of the units of ISRO. All right. It basically takes the satellite data from ISRO's satellites, and based on the images that are generated, it brings out remote sensing information, like understanding the tree cover, understanding the fishery resources, understanding mineral resources distribution, right? Understanding the distribution of rivers in the country. All such mapping information based on satellite data is brought out by NRSC, National Remote Sensing Center. It makes use of data from remote sensing satellites and even Earth observation satellites. All right. So that is the task of NRSC. Deepika is asking, sir, the recent discovery of lithium reserves in Jammu and Kashmir and the recent inclusion of private sector in exploration and mining, wouldn't it render these eco-sensitive areas more vulnerable? Yes, you're absolutely right. In J&K, initial exploration has been done, and according to the initial reports, there is a large lithium reserve in J&K. It is yet to be confirmed, it is yet to be exploited commercially. Plus, the mining rules have been amended in the latest monsoon session, right? An amendment bill was passed to the Mines Act that changes the mining regulations, allowing private sector to play a greater role in mining. So such economic projects, right, they're always a threat to the environment. Now, this is where a government has to strike a balance between growth and environment conservation. Both are contradictory, because to achieve rapid growth, you will end up destroying your environment, right? Growth will not happen without resources, without forest resources, without mineral resources. You can't achieve economic growth. But at the same time, if you blindly focus just on environment conservation, it will compromise your economic growth. It will affect the welfare of our people. So what is needed is sustainable development. We have to balance the ecological needs with the economic needs. Sustainable policies are needed where we exploit what is necessary in a sustainable manner, in an environmentally sound manner, while causing minimal damage to our environment and while protecting our ecosystems. Because ecological vulnerability is a major factor which is aggravating the impact of disasters. Right? I've been saying this from the first class. From the beginning, I'm stressing on this point. If you destroy your environment mindlessly, if you don't pay attention to conserving your ecology, disasters will have a bigger impact. Is that clear? We have seen that with various examples. Definitely, such projects will harm the ecology, making them more vulnerable for disasters. But we can plan accordingly. We can sustainably plan the exploitation. Now, just because there is a risk, we can't stop economic activities, right? Then tomorrow, how will you create jobs? How will you provide for education, healthcare? That is a basic necessity. So what we need is balanced growth. Growth with environment conservation so that we are disaster resilient. We should be able to withstand the impact of disasters, mitigate the impact. That is the focus of sustainable development. Neelkant is asking, cloudburst occurs only in hilly areas? Mostly, yes. Generally, cloudbursts happen only in hilly areas, but in a rare occasion, it can happen in other areas as well. If the right conditions are present for a sudden interaction between warm, moist air and cold air mass, cloudbursts can happen in plains as well. But it's very, very rare. Generally, cloudbursts happen only in hilly mountainous regions. Difference between flood and tsunami. Don't worry, I'll come to tsunamis later. We will study what is a tsunami, right? I'll give you the proper explanation there. See, under landslides, I was referring to a tsunami-like event. Is that clear? It's not exactly a tsunami. Tsunami, usually the term tsunami refers to an event happening in the seas and the oceans. All right? Underwater landslide triggering a wave is a tsunami. Whereas landslide and GLOF triggering flash floods is a tsunami-like event. All right? Tsunamis don't happen in lakes and rivers. But if something crashes into a lake or a river, it triggers a flash flood, which is a tsunami-like event. Think of the example that I gave. A bucket filled with water and you drop something into it, right? When something crashes, obviously the water spills out. That's a tsunami-like event. But later, tomorrow, we will discuss tsunamis in detail, right? There I'll explain what's that mechanism, what's the phenomena with regard to ocean-based tsunamis. All right, so there are many causes that contribute to a tsunami. We'll discuss that separately. So floods we have already covered, but we'll come to tsunamis later, so please hold on until then. Sumit is asking, sir, can GLOF event happen because of earthquake? Yes, I told you, right? Earthquakes can also breach the embankment of a glacial lake and it can cause a flood. Janvi is asking, landslide and debris avalanche is more or less the same? Yes, it is exactly the same. I told you, right? They have different names. Landslip, mass wasting, and depending on what debris is coming down, it has different names like rock avalanche, snow avalanche, etc. But the mechanism is all the same. Please give mains questions and discuss mains questions. Don't worry, we'll do that in the last class. Since it is a small subject, I don't want to divert by discussing questions in every class. It's not needed. Let's finish the syllabus. It's a small syllabus. At the end, we'll look at some previous questions. We'll discuss some previous questions which you can use for your answer writing practice. And also don't forget, in every topic, I'm pointing out where questions can come, what kind of questions can be asked. Under landslides, under droughts, floods, right? I kept telling you that this is a place where question can be asked. This is the type of question which can be asked. So that is where you make a note and frame a question for yourself and try to write an answer to that. All right? Pravasini is asking, please repeat how rising groundwater or increase in pore water pressure leads to a landslide. See, when groundwater table, right, the underground aquifers, this water can rise upwards through the pores that are present. Just like water percolates from the top to the groundwater table, similarly, when groundwater table is full, when it is saturated, when there is a lot of water which has already percolated due to heavy rains, eventually the groundwater table also rises up. Due to the pressure, the pore pressure, which is a result of capillary action, water moves up from the groundwater table and starts hitting the soil from below. So as the groundwater table has risen up and the water is touching the soil surface, the soil structure becomes damp. It becomes saturated with water. It weakens from the inside. And this could cause a structural slip of the slope. As the slope is, saturated with water from below, the soil and debris can crash because of its weak integrity. I'm just taking a look at the questions. Just give me a minute. All right. So these are the questions. Now we have few more minutes to go. I'll just provide a basic introduction to heat waves and cold waves. All right, we can pick it up tomorrow and we can actually cover all the remaining disasters by tomorrow. Now, a heat wave or a cold wave, both are examples of extreme weather events because it's a case of extreme temperature. Is that clear? See, we human beings and all flora and fauna, right? We thrive only under a certain ideal temperature range. If there is any extremity, if it is extremely cold or extremely hot, then it is very dangerous for the ecology, for the environment, and as well as for human physiology, for our bodily functions. to carry on, you need a certain ideal temperature range. Your core body temperature has to be maintained. Anything extreme beyond the coping mechanism of our body, right, then our physiology starts failing, causing a severe health impact. Similarly, plants, animals, birds, and the whole ecology, the whole ecosystem itself, right, they all function ideally when the temperature is in an ideal range. Life on earth is possible because of the ideal temperature. But there are certain periods where we witness extreme temperatures. In some places, we witness extreme heat during summers, which is beyond tolerable levels. There are some places where we witness extreme cold conditions, right? So, such extreme temperatures which are reported, these extreme weather events can easily turn into a disaster if humans are exposed to the temperature. Human physiology will fail at these extreme temperatures. It causes many health conditions, eventually leading to death as well. Is that clear? Heat waves and cold waves can kill people. Along with causing health conditions, it can even cause fatalities. And every year in India, hundreds of people lose their lives because of heat waves and cold waves. Is that clear? It affects many countries, not just India. Around the world, heat waves and cold waves are very common occurrences. And due to climate change and global warming, we are witnessing more heat wave and cold wave conditions. See, a heat wave or a cold wave can happen naturally as well due to natural factors. Due to abnormal changes in temperature, it can occur naturally as well. But global warming has contributed to it. The long-term changes in the climate, which we have introduced, it has altered the oceanic currents, the wind currents, the moisture levels, the rate of evaporation. So obviously, it affects the weather patterns as well, causing these abnormal weather patterns, which is a case of extreme weather. So in certain parts during summer season, we are witnessing record temperatures. Now look at Europe. In the last few weeks itself, in the last 1.5 months, there has been a record heat wave across European countries. Generally, we don't associate extreme heat with European countries, right? Europe itself is in the temperate zone. And generally, Europe has lower temperatures. During summer, it used to be a pleasant, warm temperature. But during peak summer, few countries in the Mediterranean region, especially like Spain, Italy, Greece, and even other countries up north, like Germany and even Austria, they're all reporting record level temperatures. It has triggered massive forest fires. You might have seen this in news or in social media, right? Italy, Greece, and Spain are very popular tourist destinations during the summer, right? From other cold countries, people, that is tourists, they rush towards Mediterranean for the warm weather. But unfortunately, this time, thousands of tourists were trapped under these heat wave conditions, which even triggered massive forest fires in Europe. The same has happened in United States, in Canada, right? And it happens in India as well. Is that clear? Take the forest fire in Hawaii just last week. An entire town was burnt, destroyed, hundreds of people killed because of record heat conditions. A heat wave existed which triggered the forest fire, right? Canada is facing a devastating forest fire. It's all because of record heat temperatures. So such abnormal extreme temperatures are not conducive for human health, for the environment, and it essentially turns into a major disaster. All right? So a heat wave is a short period of abnormally high temperature where the actual temperature, the actual maximum temperature recorded will be significantly higher than the normal maximum temperature that is expected. All right? In a given place, there will be a normal expected maximum temperature based on the average. Now take Delhi for example. We all know that Delhi has extreme weather during summer and winter. During summers, it's common for Delhi to cross the 40-degree mark, right? There's nothing surprising. That's common. That's naturally a feature of northern parts of India. But if the actual temperature recorded at a given place, if it is significantly higher than the expected normal, that is what we call as a heat wave. Now, let's say in Delhi, 40 degrees, 41 degrees is expected. But suddenly for few days, if Delhi records 47, 48 degrees, it is a significant departure from the normal. The actual maximum temperature has significantly departed from the normal maximum. So that essentially is a heat wave condition. Is that clear? So tomorrow, I will explain the criteria. There is a specific criteria to define a heat wave. All right. We also have a specific criteria for a cold wave. Cold wave is the opposite, where the actual minimum temperature is significantly lower than the normal minimum temperature. All right. Now, let's say in Punjab, during winter season, expected normal minimum temperature is, let's say, 2 degrees Celsius. But due to abnormal weather patterns, actual temperature might drop to -3, -5 degrees. That significant departure in the minimum temperature is a cold wave condition. All right. But there is a criteria, there is a specific threshold which has been defined by IMD. IMD is the nodal agency again for heat wave and cold wave, because IMD keeps track of all meteorological phenomena from rainfall to temperature, right? So IMD is the one which tracks temperature. So it has defined a criteria, a threshold has been set up. If the criteria is met for a place, for a given place, then heat wave or cold wave is declared by the IMD. So tomorrow we'll understand which parts of India are affected during which season, and we'll also discuss the impact, the health impact of heat waves and cold waves, and we'll look at the criteria for defining a heat wave and a cold wave. Is that clear? So I think this is enough for today. Tomorrow we'll complete all the disasters. We'll wind up heat wave and cold wave. We'll discuss earthquakes and tsunamis and forest fires. I also want to discuss biological disasters like epidemics, right? They're all very small topics. And we'll wind up with man-made disasters like industrial disasters, accidents, CBR and hazard, right? So let's wrap up the types of hazards tomorrow, and we'll be left with the last topic for the last class. So on Friday, we will discuss the global framework through the UN. We'll discuss the 3 conferences related to disaster management. We'll talk about the Disaster Management Act in India and understand the disaster management architecture in India. So this is what we are left with, and we can wrap it up by Friday. All right. So that is it for today. I hope you guys liked the session. Do let me know in the comments, and I'll see you tomorrow. All right. So till then, take care. Have a good day.